I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues live show. Please pay attention to our fancy warning graphic. It states that the Retro Rogues live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. My name is Dave Beatty, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm currently hiding behind this robot icon because I haven't had a lot of sleep, and it's not like I had a face for TV to begin with. So anyhow, I'm going to hide for today's show. But my name is Dave Beatty. I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer for nearly, well, we'll just say a very, very long time. Worked on a lot of fun things that some people have heard of, such things as Justice League of America, Batman Incorporated, and Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, and also my creator-owned projects I'm quite proud of, such as Bushy Tails, Star Gods, and Red Skirts. You can learn more about this and see examples of the artwork at my website. The URL is up on the screen. It's www.davebeatty.com. That's DAVEBEATY.com. It also serves as the online official home of the Retro Rogue Show as well. You can find links to the YouTube show and links to the Twitter and all kinds of fun stuff there. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks, hopefully watching or listening at home, some of the fun things that you have worked on as a creative professional.
Well, yes, I am Eric Alexander, also known as Bass God 14. That's Bass God 14, not Bass God 14. That's Bass God, like a bass guitar. And I'm not hiding today. I actually got a new little lighting rig. So if folks have any comments on that as far as whether they see any kind of difference, I think it's subtle. I was playing with it a little bit earlier later. It's not like a huge difference, but I think it does something. And I'm also experimenting with a new audio rig. So if people have any comments about that, because I've had some very bad audio problems. I bought a mixer. It's the On Air brand. I do not recommend that mixer to anybody because somehow not only did it give me crappy audio with one of their own microphones, it also somehow affected my built-in microphone. But the lighting I'm actually using is On Air as well, which I think is a better product. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes, right? So any comments about that, please let me know. And Dave, you didn't mention, although we'll talk about it later, but you have another credit that you just recently got that we're going to be talking about later in the pop culture segment, right?
That's true. That's true. Something new that we will be talking about here in just a little bit. In addition to that, too, hopefully next show I'll be making a very, very big announcement. But again, hopefully that'll be next episode. There's still a few loose odds and ends that we've got to get totally in place. And there'll hopefully also be an interesting way for people who want to support the show, the Retro Rogues, what we're doing on here. There'll be a very direct and interesting way that you can show your love and support of the Retro Rogues and that you are a proud member of the Rogues Gallery. But again, more about that hopefully next episode.
Very, very
all
cool.
Right. Very cool. Do you have anything on the top here you want to cover, or do we want to go ahead and get into the main?
Well, I'll just briefly mention, because I talked about it last week. I do have that film project. It's called Connection Established. My partner in that project actually released the intro to that on Facebook, and I wish I knew his Facebook right off the top of my head. It's Portronics Film Productions. You might be able to find that Portronics. Maybe he'll comment a little bit later. He tends to actually check our show out quite a bit, and he actually tends to comment. That's Matt. He was my director of photography for another project, and he's basically my co-director and co-producer for Connection Established. And that's going to be about a 15-minute we're looking at. That was the last thing I think we heard from the editor. It's going to be about a 15-minute short film. So it's experimental. It's based on the concept of doing a film in shelter in place. So none of the actors actually got to be in the same room together. So we'll see how it all comes together. I'm actually anxious to see how it comes together myself, because again, it's an experimental film.
Very cool. That's very exciting news. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting a chance to see it. And who knows, maybe we'll talk about it on the show in a little bit more in depth. That might be.
I'm going to have a pitch for you after you get a chance to watch it. I'm going to have a comic book pitch for you after that. So.
All right. Well, that sounds cool. Right on. All right. Are we good to get into our first topic for this evening?
Yeah, I think that let's get into it.
Okay. All right. So if you wouldn't mind sharing my screen, and I'll set this up real quick. Okay, so here for the first topic tonight, we're going to be talking about the Amazon original film, Vast of Night. It says it actually came out in 2019, but I just recently watched it. It felt pretty new to me. But anyhow, it is a drama, mystery, science fiction kind of a film. I'm going to read the synopsis here real quick and just a little bit about it, and then we'll actually discuss the film. In the twilight of the 1950s, on one fateful night in New Mexico, young switchboard operator Faye and charismatic radio DJ Everett discover a strange audio frequency that could change their small town and the future forever. So this is directed by Andrew Patterson. The writers are Andrew Patterson and Craig Sanger. The cast is mostly a lot of young actors I'm not too terribly familiar with, but Sierra McCormick, Jake Horowitz, Gail Cronier, I've actually seen her in some things. But anyhow, this is an Amazon original film. This was actually suggested. I think Bobby Chambers suggested this last episode, didn't he?
Yes, that's correct. So this is a suggestion from the Rogues Gallery. And as I've mentioned, we are always open to the Rogues Gallery making suggestions on films, television shows, comics, whatever it is you guys want us to review.
And this is a perfect example because this is exactly what we did. We took that suggestion and we ran with it. So let's see. We're going to start off with our overall impressions of Vast of Night. I was honestly slightly distracted when I was watching this because of the big announcement that hopefully I'll be making on the next episode. I thought the production values were kind of interesting. I thought it was a little talky at times, if that's such a thing. But I don't mind dialogue and I don't mind dramas. Overall impressions was I thought it was pretty well put together. But I'm going to be honest with you. I was slightly distracted. So I don't want to be too harsh on the film. I didn't think it was bad. I thought it was interesting. I really actually want to watch it again because I felt kind of bad. I was kind of slightly distracted when I was trying to watch the film. But what like I said, it looked interesting, and I enjoyed it for the most part. I thought the young cast was interesting and charismatic for sure. I really liked the actress who played Faye Cocker. I really enjoyed too a lot of the 1950s tech. I mean, I felt like they focused on it a little bit too much at times, but I really loved it. Like the switchboard operator, a lot of the stuff they were doing with recording things on microphone and reel to reel, audio and all that stuff was a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of it. But my overall impression of it is I thought it was interesting. And like I said, I want to watch it again where I can sit down and focus on it a little bit more. When we roll out what I've been working on here, you'll understand why I was so distracted. But anyhow, no, it was an interesting film. So tell me, Eric, what were your initial overall impressions of Vast of Night?
Well, giving credit again where credit is due, Bobby Chambers, he does say he's happy to see we checked it out. And Bobby, I'm happy you suggested it. One of the hurdles to doing this, by the way, was that I did not have Amazon Prime. So I just want to put that out there that now I do have Amazon Prime. So if folks out there do want to recommend something from Amazon Prime, let me know because both Dave and I have it. And that's kind of one of the issues with content that we review. We both either have to possess the movie physically or we both have to have access to that particular streaming service. So at least for a month, I am now committed to Amazon Prime. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And thanks, Bobby Chambers, again, for recommending this. Now, it's interesting because I didn't go into this with a clean slate. Actually, Doomcock, who some of you folks may or may not be familiar with, he actually was the first person that actually called this movie to my attention at all. And that was actually prior to Bobby's post when he said that maybe we want to consider checking this out. And he was super, super critical of this movie. Like he basically said it was trash. So I did go into this movie with very low expectations. I always take Doomcock with a grain of salt. I do like a lot of his content. I think he's incredibly articulate, but he's also very divisive, and he's also very, very critical, and sometimes I would say just downright negative. So I take his opinion with a grain of salt. So I didn't go into this unbiased. I went in with very low expectations. I kind of thought the movie was going to stink because of what Doomcock said, and I think even Bobby mentioned that he thought it was a very uneven film. And because I had such low expectations, I actually enjoyed this film quite a bit, I have to say. You hit the nail right on the head, Dave. I've always kind of said that I'm an analog guy in a digital world. And I'm saying that when I'm sitting here on my computer and I can figure computers out. I'm not like completely not tech savvy, but I love analog tech. I like vacuum tubes. You know, I used to be in a band. That's why I call myself Bass God 14. I used to play bass guitar in a band. That's where the name comes from. That's why I like to go by that. That was basically the first big semi-successful, I would say. That's what I would term it as, semi-successful creative endeavor. I actually did an independent comic book before I did music, but my first comic book was a complete and total flop. My band actually got fairly popular, even at work and things like that. We had like a little following. You know, we used to do concerts, and we actually, you know, we're doing pretty good. We actually made some pretty good demos and all that kind of stuff. And so I still cling to that, you know, to the bass god thing. But because of that, because of my experience with music, I love things like mixing boards, and I love things like, you know, just seeing those plugs, you know what I mean? Those like the quarter-inch plugs that you use. Same with a guitar, like you were talking about the switchboard. I love that sort of analog tech, you know what I mean? That old school tech, the reel-to-reel machines, those old style microphones, you know what I mean? Like I love all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of funny because we call ourselves the Retro Rogues, and this is a true retro film. You know, this is a modern film that was made in 2019, as Dave mentioned, but the subject matter is absolutely 100% retro. It's supposed to be taking place in the late 1950s, and I think it actually does a pretty good like picture of that time. I wish my dad was in better health because my dad is like 82 years old and he grew up during this time. He was a teenager. You know, I think he graduated in 54 from high school. And I wish I could kind of show it to him and see, well, what do you think, Dad? Do you think that things were really like that? Do you think that's a good reflection of that era? Granted, my father grew up on the East Coast. He didn't grow up in this. This is supposed to take place in New Mexico. It was filmed in Texas, but supposed to take place in a small town in New Mexico. I'd be like, what do you think? Do you think this is a good representation of the way things were back then? Because I thought it was fascinating in that regard. I guess I kind of really dig period pieces. And it's my understanding, although they call this an Amazon original, I could be wrong, but I think because it said Slam Dance at the end, so I think this was an independent film. I don't think Amazon originally like commissioned this. I could be wrong. I should have done some more research on that, but I noticed that the ending credits, because I watched the credits the whole way through, that it said Slam Dance, and so I'm wondering if I think this was an independent film that got into Slam Dance, and then Amazon acquired it. That's my guess. I don't know that for sure, but I've heard this spoken of as an independent film. So I'm not sure which one it is. I'm not sure if Amazon actually commissioned this or approved it beforehand, or if these independent filmmakers went ahead and made this film, and then got it sold at a film festival. Slam Dance being considered sort of a major film festival. But I actually enjoyed it, and I kind of have Doomcock to thank for it, just because he gave me such low expectations of the film, and I thought it was going to be complete and utter garbage. Oh, and Jane is in the house, Dave, and she says, "Hey guys."
Hi, Mom. So I was just looking into it, and yeah, this did actually premiere at the 2019 Slam Dance Film Festival. So as far as I could tell, this does appear to have actually been like an indie film that Amazon acquired. So that's interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, and like I said, I saw it, and overall, well, we should get into the spoiler reviews before I get too far into it. But like I said, I was slightly distracted when I watched it. I liked what I saw. And I love, like I said, like the old school tech. And then this actress, like I said, a lot of the performances I found very, very charismatic. If I had the money to do a Red Skirts film, I would hire her to play Mary in a heartbeat.
Maybe we can look into that, Dave.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool. But no, she, like I said, it just overall, I enjoyed it. I was one of those things, because I was distracted. I was like going, okay, I've got to watch this again. And that's the big thing. It kind of harkened back to, do you remember Project Blue Book? Not the newer one, but the original show.
No,
from
I
back
never
in the
watched
day?
that. I never was into that ones. I never watched it. Sorry.
All right. Well, back in the day when I was a kid growing up, they had a show. I think it was called Project Blue Book, and it was about the Air Force investigating people's reports of, sort of alien spacecraft and that kind
I'm
of thing.
familiar with the real Project Blue Book, by the way,
Oh,
just
okay.
not
All right.
the
Okay.
TV show. I'm
Oh,
completely familiar with the
I,
real Project Blue Book. So
I'm talking about the actual the television show, not the real Project Blue Book, because there are moments of this that reminded me of that, and then obviously there's elements that reminded me of Outer Limits or even Twilight Zone because of the setup. But
oh, come
but
on.
we should,
This was a Twilight Zone ripoff. I mean, that's
yeah,
exactly what the setup was. They even imitated Rod Serling's voice almost precisely. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I guess we'll go ahead. Let's get into some spoiler talk about it. But overall impressions, it
That's
sounds like your overall impression, it was positive. My overall impression was positive. So, are we good to just get into doing some spoiler talk?
well. Let's let Bobby kind of lead us in because he's
All
kind of
right.
hitting the nail right on the head. He says, "I love the buildup and thought the 1950s tech was great. A lot of the reviews flip flopped on the ending, which is where I struggled. And I could definitely see that. I could definitely see that. I don't know if we want to go straight to the ending, though, Dave. I think we should address that. But maybe we can talk about some of the other things, maybe things you had an issue with or things you struggled with. Or, we mentioned obviously we love the retro tech. What are you kind of mentioned you had some difficulties focusing on this movie. Besides your distractions, you said the film was a little bit wordy. And I would say this is a very dialogue intensive movie.
Yeah, the word I used was talky. There's a lot of films that are talky and they work really well. Like Pulp Fiction's talky. There's a lot of films that are kind of more dialogue driven sometimes than what's happening, and it's kind of a hallmark sometimes, in all honesty, of independent film because you typically don't have the budget to do a ton of setups. You don't have the budget to do a bunch of stunts and effects. So you lean into your conversations, your dialogue, and you either lean into that or you lean into the establishing shots and you try to do a lot of stuff with trick photography. You know what I mean? Like it's just one of the hallmarks of independent film. So now let me say,
when you talk about the beginning of the film, the very beginning of the film, I mean, you're hitting the nail right on the head. That's exactly what it is, right? In fact, this was the major criticism that Doomcock had of the film, and I could see it because this is what he posted on Twitter, and this is what I saw, was that he talked about, particularly, he didn't say in the opening, but I can see he's talking about the opening. Um, in the first, scene of the movie, it's pretty much like one continuous shot, right? Which I thought was really interesting. Someone who's into film, I like that kind of stuff. But he also talked about a little trick that they did, which is kind of something it's a bad trick. Basically, it's regarded as poor filmmaking, and it was actually a signature of Ed Wood and those type of movies back in the day, which is when the actors have their backs to the camera, and you can't see their lips moving. What that does is it basically makes you be able to save a lot on audio. So obviously, when you're doing ADR, which ADR is, when they actually, if they don't get the audio on set, they do ADR, which is basically like doing a voiceover like you would do in a cartoon, but they're doing it live action. The actor comes into the studio and they re-record the lines because they didn't get it on the first, whatever, second take, whatever take they use. The audio wasn't perfect, but they were recording live. So what you do is you have the actors, have their backs to the camera, so you can't see their mouth. So the ADR is much easier to accomplish. And that's like a filmmaking trick that's kind of considered like, like I said, it's considered very Ed Wood. And that, I remember, was one of the major criticisms that Doomcock had. And as you mentioned, Dave, there's obviously kind of a, like you said, I think tricky camera work going on, which I liked. I actually kind of like that. I like those long continuous shots because when I see that kind of stuff, I think in my head, how would I do that? How would I do that if I was filming this? But I think for some people, like I said, it becomes very Ed Wood and it turns them off.
well, and I was going to say, in all honesty, some of that I think kind of could have been, like I said, planned and intentional too.
Right.
You know, if it harkens back to that era, one. But then number two, like I said, it looked like it was always intended to be done in that manner. It didn't,
Right.
you know, so
It could
it's
have
not.
been. It could have been an homage to Ed Wood, for all we know.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
and
That could have been an homage to Ed Wood in that style. That basically that's the old bargain basement style of filmmaking.
right. And when you realize that this setup, basically how the film starts, it starts with an Outer Limits Twilight Zone intro. You know, you talked
Twilight
about how
Zone. That was Rod
yeah.
Serling's voice. I mean, that was a perfect imitation of Rod Serling.
Right, but it had shades of Outer Limits too. I thought it was intended to be Twilight Zone, but I felt like it also had shades of Outer Limits.
Which one came out first, Dave? Because I don't want to misspeak. Did Outer Limits come out first or Twilight Zone?
I honestly don't.
That's something we should know, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
We can have that debate on a later time, but the point I'm making is that it very much harkened to that, and I thought that was really cool, and it was kind of neat because it was the Paradox, what they call it, Paradox Theater or something or whatever it was. Yeah, it was really kind of cool the way that they set it up, and then there were points in the film where they would cut back to it and use it occasionally like as a transition vehicle. And I thought that was interesting, the way that they kind of set those up.
See, I felt that was kind of distracting. That's one thing I really didn't like. I thought it was a little distracting, but you liked it. You liked the way they went back to that black and white. That, you know, basically they went back to that 4:3 scale. Like it doesn't fill the TV. You liked that? You thought that was a good way to transition some of the scenes?
I thought it was an interesting way to transition the scenes. And I think it's one of those things. I think they decided to do that because they wanted to keep people. You know, it's kind of weird because I feel like they did such a good job of setting it up. I don't think they necessarily needed to do that unless they had to, because for some reason, like they needed to do a couple pickup shots or whatever, and they couldn't match something. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's hard to say, you know, but I personally didn't feel like it distracted necessarily, but I couldn't tell if it was intentional, like they were trying to drive home the idea that this is like a Twilight Zone episode, in case you'd forgotten. Because I feel like the setup is so strong, I don't feel like they needed to kind of get back into that, because once the story gets going, you're so wrapped up in the minutia about what's happening. I don't think you can forget that you're kind of in a Twilight Zone episode. It seems pretty blatant that you're in one. So I don't know if it was necessary, but at the same point, it didn't necessarily bother me.
What about when they transitioned to just the black screen? What did you think of that?
No, that's the stuff that did bother me. I didn't like that, especially like in the scene, like there's a dramatic moment towards the end of the film where they're in the car, and let's set it up for. Well, I think people who've seen it know, but there's this old lady, and she tells this story about her son and how he had these inaudible words, and she'd heard it once before, and she kind of gives us the background of some previous visitations, basically, by the alien race or whatever that's kind of inhabits the story, even though we don't see them necessarily. So, but when they're in the car and they're kind of relaying some information, and the DJ guy is playing back some of that, and it causes the guy actually driving the car, and then his wife or girlfriend or whatever, they actually go into the trance that the old lady actually describes to them. And when it happens, it's almost like they're going to have a wreck or whatever. And that's when I found that go to black screen was kind of the most egregious, because I think it was pretty obvious they probably didn't have the budget to finish those shots. And so they were kind of trying to find a way to kind of cut around the fact that they couldn't really, you know, because that was a classic car. I'm pretty sure they couldn't afford to wreck it, number one. And the way that they kind of cut around that to try and create the illusion that there was almost a wreck, but not a wreck, and then they get out of the car, and that's what gets them into the woods for like our big reveal that happens towards the end of the film. that's where I felt the use of the black screen was the most egregious, because that did take me out of it. It's like, I get it. I don't know that you have to cut that hard to create the idea that there was almost a wreck. That if I have one criticism, that's the criticism. I didn't like the use of the black screen from time to time, but the way that they tried to handle that near miss towards the end of the film, I felt like that really took me out of the film, because it really felt like it's like we don't have the budget to shoot this, so let's try and cut around it.
Yeah, I think myself as an independent filmmaker, I was much more forgiving of that. Like I was like, I get it. I was like you said, they didn't have the budget to crash two classic cars into each other. I mean, I get it. And I thought the way they did it was okay. I actually liked it because the actress that you mentioned, who's the one that's pictured here on screen, I thought she did a great performance to show how terrified she was. I mean, she's literally holding her baby sister. So I got it. I thought it was done well. The scene that really bothered me was, I think, the first time they did it, which was when they had the caller, the Air Force, the airman, the former airman who calls in to the show, and then it goes to black. I was like, why are they doing that? You know what I mean? Like I was like, one thing for me is like, I kind of was like, aren't they going to just show him? You know what I mean? That would have been a natural thing to me. Obviously, I guess they never filmed that particular actor. They only used his voiceover, but it's like they had the actor. I can see the credit on IMDb because I looked it up. You know what I mean? Just because I wanted to see, what the actor looked like, and I was like, why didn't they actually like show him? You know what I mean? And maybe even they could have shown him with like some boils or something, you know what I mean? Or something like that to kind of give you a little bit more of what's going on. Or he could have been like all in shadow or, something. That's the way I would have gone, because it's like, I have the actor anyway. Why not utilize him? So that's a decision that I question. The car crash, I get. I just don't think they had the budget for the crash. And I think that was, to me, kind of an inventive way to deal with that. But I didn't like what they did with the call-in when it went to black.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. I just didn't enjoy the kind of what they did with the use of the black screen just overall. But for me, the worst part was just sort of the end. I've seen enough 70s, 60s, 50s, whatever, near miss wreck stuff that while we're homaging things, let's just see how somebody else did it back in the day, and let's just pick it up the same way they did it. You could still cut to the black screen to keep a continuity if you want to keep a continuity. But I felt like at times the way that it was done, it was, for me, it was that's for me is the moment where it took me out of the film the most. Yeah. Because and then when you see the car is almost completely stopped when they get out, and it didn't even kind of even slightly skid to a stop, and there had been so many different ways to do it. You could have just shown the wheels skidding with the dirt and then cut up to the car. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways to, just as a storyteller, that's the one moment where I'm like going, okay, I feel like this could have been handled a little bit better. Because otherwise, for the most part,
there's 1,000 ways to do it depending on the insurance that you have, Dave.
Right, but I, like I said, and again, like I said, I want to watch this movie again. I found it really interesting. I am not intending to trash talk the film at all, but that's the one for me. That was probably the most, like I said, that's my biggest nitpick, my biggest egregious thing. Is that I didn't like how they handled that car wreck scene.
What did you think about the use of those continuous shots, where they did those one shots that were really interesting to me? I'm actually very curious how they did them, especially the ones where they went through the entire town. What did you think of those?
I thought they were really cool. I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's part of the reason I want to watch the film again, because the film is, I thought, really well constructed, and I enjoyed so much of it. For example, I really enjoyed the opening scene where they're like it's kind of like they're at the high school gym or whatever, and they kind of set the whole thing up, and they're walking in front of the cars with the headlights, and it just, that whole thing, the way they set that up, and they're kind of doing that. She's recording the stuff on her video recorder, her audio recorder she just got, and they're
tape
talking
recorder.
About
it's a
yeah,
tape
exactly.
And it's an old reel-to-reel style tape recorder, which I love that aesthetic. That's just something I never owned my own reel-to-reel player, but of course that was a big thing. The first studio, or one of the first studios I went into, had a reel-to-reel player. My dad actually owned a reel-to-reel recorder that didn't work, and I used to look at it in the garage. He had it in the garage, and I would check it out. Again, I always just love that analog tech, but she has one of those little portable ones, and I thought that was actually really cool. And the fact that that she's actually like recording herself, and she's sort of practicing, because her friend is obviously a DJ, and so she's actually practicing with her friend on the tape recorder. That really took me back. I had a friend who used to do his own little radio shows on his little cassette recorder. Of course, it was the smaller cassette, not the reel to reel. Like I said, the reel to reel was kind of before my time. It was the only place you really saw it was in a studio. But I just thought that was really cool how she was doing that, because I know people who used to do stuff like that, or they'd sing to themselves on their cassette player. It's kind of funny, like for some reason that magic seems to be gone. You know what I mean? Like everybody has a phone that they could do something similar on, even kids, and you don't really see them doing that anymore. You know what I mean? But I that kind of really took me back. I really liked that.
And I mean, and like I said, I loved all the retro tech too. Like I loved all the stuff just with the switchboard. And the part of the reason I picked this image actually of the actress with the headset on, is not because it's reflected in the poster. It's because of the fact that I love kind of this era, and I've always wanted to see like for example, like if it were up to me, okay, because Marvel got the rights to the Fantastic Four back, I would actually set the Fantastic Four movie in the 60s. Like that would be my approach for the Fantastic Four. That's how I would have the Fantastic Four kind of be relevant, is because a lot of the things that we would use as modern technology today, Reed Richards would have invented back in the 60s, essentially. And that's one of the things that, would kind of help give them their advantage against their villains and whatever that they would fight, was the fact that Reed was basically giving them the best technology, just like in the comics. But there was a cosplayer who years ago did an amazing 1960s style Wasp. And she actually built the Wasp's helmet from back in the day. And she actually took one of these old style headsets, like what the actress was wearing, and incorporated it into her costume. And it was so amazing because it just felt so authentic and so real. And it was just so amazing. And so just watching her wear this headset, I kept kind of thinking about that and going, man, it'd be so cool to see like a Marvel superhero film like set in this era, kind of using this tech. It'd be so much fun. And I loved, actually, one of the reasons I like X-Men First Class is for that same reason, is that it takes place in that era when those characters were first created. And it feels, for me, not the most relevant, but in a weird way, somewhat more authentic, because it's just like those characters were created in that period. It's a weird thing, has nothing to do with Fast and Night, but that's the reason I picked this image. And that's one of the things I like about this movie, is I love all this retro tech, because it's just like, this is so cool. This is fun, and I just loved it. I just loved it. So
well, speaking of sort of the retro tech, there's also the sort of retro vision of the future that I really liked. And it comes from this character as well, where she's reading these magazine articles to practice on her tape recorder. And she's telling her DJ friend, these stories that he hasn't heard. And she's saying like, yeah, this is true. This is really going to happen. And it's kind of funny because like the first two things, like the first thing she talks about is the idea that they're going to have autonomous cars, but it's not like the autonomous cars the way that we have them today. It's basically this idea of having sort of an electronic highway, so that the cars are basically guided by the road. So they're, as long as they're on the quote unquote electronic road, they know where the other cars are and all that kind of stuff. And that's how they don't have any sensors. It's based on the road, which, by the way, I have heard of that before. I think they got that from something that was actually a real idea at one time, which was to basically put some sort of electronic wiring in the road that the cars would be able to detect. And so would it require any kind of sensors, because they would know where all the other cars are on the highway. And that was one way of doing transportation. That was one idea of having sort of autonomous cars. And then the other thing she talked about was sort of the tube thing, like the Jetsons, where basically the idea is that you'd have these vacuum tubes that would take you from Los Angeles to New York in like 10 minutes, you know what I mean, where you would just be like sort of vacuumed from one side to the other. And she talks about that's a real thing too, that's going to happen. In fact, the car thing, she says, was going to happen like in 1974 or something like that. And then the tube thing was going to be like the year 2000. The DJ is like, so doesn't one conflict with the other? And she's all like, well, no, one's maybe for short trips and the other one's for long trips. And then the thing she talks about the last was the idea of small portable TV phones. And that's the one the DJ is all like, oh, that's just stupid. You know what I mean? That's not going to happen. That's right. I like that. It reminds me of an old gag my dad told me that I've never actually got to see, but he said it's really cool. I think it was on F Troop. And on F Troop, I think they had an episode, if I don't recall, this is me remembering what my dad told me. But he always told me, you got to see this. And this was before YouTube. It was, I think, a time traveler, and he was explaining the telephone to the characters, and he said it was really cool because they gave the best explanation of why a telephone was the stupidest idea and that it would never work. You know what I mean? Like, it was just a dumb idea. And so it kind of reminded me of my dad telling me that story. I've never seen that bit, by the way. I've never actually seen the bit, but it reminded me of that because it is kind of funny because you think about that. What would it be like to explain some of the things that we have today to someone back then, and whether they would believe you or not? You know what I mean? And I just like the idea that he thought the little television phones that's just stupid. He's like, I can deal with the cars and I can deal with the tubes, but yeah, those television phones, that's a that's a dumb idea.
Yeah, it was interesting. And that's what I said. I mean, overall, I just found the film to be really interesting. And like I said, I think my harshest criticism is just kind of how they handle just a few little things kind of here and there. I think towards the end would be my biggest, sort of criticism. But at the same point, too, I understood what they were going for. And like I said, I felt like it was an independent production based on what I was seeing. So overall, like I said, I found it to be a really interesting film, and I enjoyed it. And like I said, I enjoyed it enough that I want to be able to watch it again, where I could actually pay, more attention to it. I guess I should talk about the big reveal, the big ending.
Before we do, Bobby had another comment, and I did want to address this too with the beginning, because I want to go back to that just for a second. He said he loved the long shots. The setup really captured some of the 50s charm that I feel gets overlooked in period films. And I totally agree. Actually, one that I would kind of maybe compare it to in a lot of ways is Back to the Future, although this one has definitely got a different tone. Back to the Future is very much, the original Back to the Future is very much an homage to the 50s, right? It's very, it's an idealized version of the 50s. Although there was an interesting thing that's kind of topical in this one. They actually did get a little bit into, how in the 1950s, it wasn't necessarily great if you weren't white. You know what I mean? The character that calls in is a black former airman from the Air Force. And it looks like they were exploiting him along with Hispanic airmen to basically bury like alien spacecraft that were emitting radiation. I mean, that's kind of what I got from it, because the idea was that no one was going to believe them. So they even kind of got that too, you know what I mean? Where they said, yeah, it is a very idealized version, but they also get into it a little bit that maybe it wasn't so ideal for everybody, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
So they actually touched on that, which I thought was pretty cool. And does actually make it kind of more, I guess, topical for today. It makes it fit in a little bit more today with the contemporary attitudes. You know what I mean? So I thought they did a good job with that. And in terms of the beginning and the continuous shots and everything like that, I did want to mention that the beginning, I love that. I love the one shot. There are one shot competitions and things like that they do at film festivals and things like that I've always wanted to be involved with, because I've seen some of them, and I was just really impressed with what some people can do with that continuous one shot. And it's really it's a cool thing if you can master it, because for me, it just looks awesome. But, talking about being them kind of talky, Dave, you were mentioning that. I had a real problem with that beginning scene following exactly what they were talking about. Like, the only thing I really got was like the chipmunk squirrel thing. Like, I had no idea what the DJ was talking about with that one guy at the beginning. Like, I was completely confused. And I think part of it was his accent. The DJ's accent was hard for me to understand at the beginning of the film because he's yapping like so fast.
Well, and I actually started off actually watching the film actually with earbuds in, and I'm actually watching it on my phone because I was having to go from room to room because I was doing some stuff. And the picture of my phone looked good, so there wasn't any picture problems. But yeah, with the accent and whatever, it sounded really kind of tinny on the little earbuds, and I kept thinking, man, I gotta watch this on the television. So eventually, when I had a moment, I sat down in front of the television and I put it up on my big screen television with the sound, and it sounded much better. But I did have a little bit of a thing following him. But I think for me, part of following what he was doing is because he had a cigarette in his mouth part of the time. He kept talking with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, which is kind of a fun and cool thing to do a little bit of here and there to make it authentic. But I felt like he had that cigarette in his mouth too long.
Yeah.
Because when you see they do that in movies, it's kind of cool the way they set it up. But when you see someone who really plays that concept really well, they kind of want to take it out. And they use it as a really dramatic kind of prop, The way he was using it was very authentic. That's what someone who had a cigarette would normally kind of do. They would just talk with it in their mouth, but it made it kind of hard to follow. So I had some similar issues with that too. But like I said, part of mine was the fact that I started off watching the film on my phone with earbuds, and then eventually I was able to sit down in front of my television and then, actually pay better attention. But I liked a lot of the long shots. I thought they were cool.
I did that. Oh, and I want to say the film that really reminds me of is, have you ever seen the Buddy Holly story?
Yes, I could totally see that. I could totally see
the opening.
Yeah.
To me, it was almost like an homage to the opening of the Buddy Holly story.
And I could see that. There were a lot of things in this film I could see it hearkening back to something, and I would almost think that a lot of that was intentional. I think that's another thing. This film very much lovingly, I felt like at times recreated that era, and just really kind of got wrapped up in it. And I thought that was really kind of fun and kind of cool. That's and it was weird because that first long shot where they're talking, she's recording on the tape recorder, and she's telling him about the future. Eventually, you get to this point where they're just kind of walking down the street and kind of talking. It actually kind of reminded me of my childhood.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, in the early teens. I mean, I didn't have a car until way late into high school because I just couldn't afford it. So I remember just kind of walking with friends, and even sometimes walking with that cute girl that you liked, and just kind of talking to them, and it kind of brought me back to that. So
I remember that line. He was like, "Why didn't you get in the car?" She's all like, "As I don't get into cars. I just walk everywhere." That's what That's just
right.
Thing. I think she even mentioned she didn't even have a bike. She stole a bike in this because she didn't even have a bicycle.
And see, that's weird because I can relate to that because I never had a bike growing up. Well, I had one, but that's a long story, and it didn't last very long. But for the most of my childhood, I didn't have a bike, so I kind of understood that. I just walked everywhere too. So I can't. That's what I'm saying. It reminded me of that. So, and not in a bad way, but in a good way. Like I said, overall, really enjoyed the film.
Now, what did you think about the ending, Dave? Because you mentioned that Bobby maybe he had issues with it. And I don't know exactly how we want to say this, if we want to say everything. I mean, we have the spoiler warning up, but what did you think of the ending?
Well, like I said, the ending reminded me, this film reminded me of, but the ending definitely reminded me of Project Blue Book, because there was a couple of specific episodes where at the end the big reveal was the spacecraft, right? Like there's a spacecraft or whatever, and then the events that transpire after that, is sort of where the show kind of trails off, right? That's always the big reveal, because they always seem to be kind of like one step behind, actually making the actual real discovery, and you see the ship fly off. So they kind of give us sort of that, I would say kind of their version of that Close Encounters moment, but it's kind of more the moment where the guy's sitting in the truck at the railroad stop with the radio. They kind of try to give us that moment, and it happens in the woods where we kind of see the ships. But we don't get the actual contact, first contact kind of thing. We just get sort of the ships. And then they kind of cut back to some different things. And then at the end, we kind of get sort of this ambiguous, sort of ending, and you're left to kind of draw your own sort of conclusions. And those kind of endings are always controversial. Those kind of endings always play well with some people, leave other people cold. I felt like within the context of what this story was doing, I honestly felt like it worked. I liked it better than the supposed car crash.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because at the ending, I was actually getting really frustrated. The ending is kind of obvious. Dave, you kind of alluded to it, and the fact that, these kind of movies, everything is kind of set up for that big reveal at the end. What I call the money shot. That's where you have, this happens a lot in independent film. You have like that one shot that's kind of almost cements the film. It really makes the film pop. And a lot of times when it's at the very end of the movie, I kind of feel like, I don't know if you should have done that. You know what I mean? Because it's too obvious. It's too predictable. And it did kind of fall into that trap. I would say, like it's kind of 50-50. You know what I mean? Like in a way, they could have gone in a different direction that would have made it, I think, a little bit more of sort of, a little bit more of a I'm trying to think of the word I'm thinking of. It's like a little bit more predictable, because there is a little bit of a twist. But like you said, there's some ambiguity in the final shot. That final shot does kind of give you some ambiguity. But leading up to that, it's kind of like an obvious path. And I did get a little bit frustrated. In particular, I got frustrated. I don't think it's anything to tell people that you get to see the ship. Okay, you do get to see the spaceship. We kind of alluded to that already. One thing that really frustrated me was he didn't take the picture. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, the whole point is for you to take the picture. And I got really frustrated about that. I was like, I hate that kind of stuff in movies. It's like, this was the whole reason you guys came out there. You came with the camera and you're not going to take a picture. But then, and I don't want to give away that last scene, but that last scene does give you a little bit of indication of like, oh, okay, maybe that's why they didn't take the picture. You know what I mean? There's a little bit more going on than what you actually see. So I was really frustrated by that. But I did think the final shot gave me enough to think about. I honestly kind of like those, as you kind of mentioned, ambiguous endings. A lot of people hate that. I like that. And maybe that's going to doom me as a filmmaker, or maybe it's going to make me a really controversial filmmaker that people are just going to love or hate. You know what I mean? Because I do like that. I do like a little bit of open-endedness. So you kind of have to figure it out yourself exactly what happened. And what I like about that is then my interpretation is just as valid as yours. We talked about this in our Joker review. One of the reasons that I love the Joker so much is because you really don't know what's real and what's not. You don't really know what exactly happened and what didn't. There are clues, but you don't really know. And my interpretation of the events is just as good as yours, and that's the case in The Vast of Night.
That's true. And like I said, I didn't hate the ending. It's not that at all. I mean, I felt like there's a couple of different ways you could go with that ending, and I felt like that ending is as valid as, in all honesty, anything else. I would have handled it a little bit differently. My ending probably would have been a little bit more finite, and maybe someone could say, well, that's in a weird way its own, predictable kind of thing. But I would have leaned into the idea that we're hearkening back, to other productions. And so I would have given us an ending that would have bookended what we were doing and brought it all back.
To me, it was very Close Encounters. It was very much like an homage to the Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Right.
Even the ship, even the design.
Yes. But what I would have done is I would have hearkened back to that 1950s, that 1950s sci-fi idea a little bit more, and not because that's the thing. It did end in a very, because as you get towards the end, it does kind of become more Close Encounters. And then that's kind of how it, resolves itself. I would have picked an ending that was probably a little bit more 1950s-esque, just to, again, bring it all back. Because they do that with the credits anyway. With the credit sequence at the end, they do bring it back to that Twilight Zone kind of idea. So I would have just had the ending be a little bit more obvious and maybe even switch it to the TV screen kind of idea. and then lean into the credits. So it starts with the homage. It very clearly ends with the homage, and they did that in the film. And like I said, so it's not like I would have taken a slightly different approach, and I'm not even saying my approach would have been better. It just would have been different. Because in all honesty, like I said, overall, I thought the film was good and I enjoyed it. So I don't have a lot of criticism. That would be my only criticism. It's just there's just a few little things at the end. That's pretty much it.
No, I totally get that. Going back a little bit, Bobby mentioned the pacing felt out of place when they got to the older woman. Still can't put my finger on it, but I felt that scene snapped me out of the trance, laugh out loud. Or maybe that was the point, laugh out loud. We didn't address that scene very much. You did talk about that a little bit, Dave. Personally, I didn't feel like it really took me out of the story or anything like that. I found it interesting, the scene with the old lady, but it is a little different than the rest of the movie, so I can kind of see where Bobby's coming from.
Well, and I liked that. Here's what I would say this film and some aspects reminded me of. One of my favorite, and love him or hate him, M. Night Shyamalan films is actually Signs. I really, really like Signs.
Very controversial.
Yeah. But I really, really like the movie Signs. And this film, to me, had shades kind of Signs. Because Signs kind of does the same thing. It plays a lot of things out. There's a lot of talky bits, and it's very... by talky bits, it doesn't mean that that's bad. It just means that they're playing the film out in conversations and connections between people, and not necessarily leaning into like effects, or leaning into like not leaning into a lot of special effects, not leading into a lot of stunts, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because again, that's not a criticism. I would compare it to Signs in a good way, not a bad way, because I really love Signs. And that's kind of what this film a lot of times reminded me of. So the scene where they're talking to the old lady, it kind of reminded me of that scene, spoiler alert, in Signs where Mel Gibson's character has his conversation with M. Night Shyamalan's character, because he has a cameo in every movie, and it ends with him saying, "Oh yeah, and I locked one of them in my pantry." It reminded me of that, because they're having that kind of tense conversation, and then it's kind of, there's that exclamation mark at the end. It's like, "Oh, and don't go in my pantry. I locked one of them in there," or whatever. And you're like, "What?" So that, I think that scene was meant to harken back to that kind of idea, because she's relaying a lot of information, and they play that out. Like I said, they play that out in the car. Because when they play that tape back and those two people go into the trance, they must have the car wreck. They pay that off later in the film. So I didn't find the conversation to be all that terribly whatever. But again, here's my biggest thing with this film. I wonder how well this film is playing with the younger generation, because this film is paced in such a way that I would imagine most younger viewers would just be tuning out based on, what Hollywood is telling us that they want to watch. I mean, I maybe at times wonder, it's like these young actors are so charismatic and I enjoyed watching them so much, but at the same point I'm like going, what audience is this for? Is this audience for me? Is it for the younger generation? Is it meant to bridge the gap? I don't know. What do you think, Eric?
It's really interesting because it has I think, gosh, I don't want to overrate it, but I think it's like 4.5 or better, you know what I mean, out of 5 points. The rating is very high for this film. I do wonder, as you mentioned, who's watching it, what the demographic is. I wish I had watched this with one of my daughters, actually, because then I could kind of give you that take of what a younger person thinks of it, because I think this would have been a cool movie to actually watch with one of my daughters. I should put that out there. I do think it's actually a fair. It can get a little intense, like if you're your kid scares easily, that kind of a thing, they might have some issues with it. But I think it is kind of the film that certainly a more mature, even younger child, as long as they have a little bit more maturity, I would be very interested in their take on it. I think that's an interesting point. By the way, Bobby mentions that Signs is one of the best. So Bobby apparently is also a big Signs fan. But I would actually compare the two in terms of being controversial, because like I said, I know there's people that absolutely despise this film, thought it was complete trash. So it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, again, opinions vary, but I quite love Signs. I've always enjoyed that film. So I mean, for me, it's a great film. If I'm gonna pick on an M. Night Shyamalan film, I'm gonna pick on The Happening. But we'll worry about that some other night. So no, but like I said, my overall impression of the film is very positive. Do you have anything else you would like to relay about the film, Eric, or do you think that we're?
Yeah, I think it's I don't get the hate. I mean, I understand, like, for instance, I understand what I mentioned about Doomcock, what he was talking about, but I could very well see that was intentional, and that was sort of an homage to that Ed Wood style of filmmaking. It is a trick, and it's considered a bad trick. It's considered, a faux pas now, like a film faux pas. But I think maybe that was deliberate. And if it wasn't deliberate, I get what they were trying to do in terms of saving money. So I actually would recommend this one.
Yeah, I would too. Like I said, I found it to be enjoyable. I want to watch it again where I can focus on a little bit more. I thought the actors and the performances, they're very charismatic. I found the story to be very interesting. My only few complaints, I think, one of them could be attributed just to budget. And if it was an independent, and it appears to be an independent film that Amazon acquired. So, other than that, that's kind of it. Overall, I thought it was very interesting. But again, too, like I said, I love this kind of a story. It reminds me of Signs. Obviously, it leans into and homages, things like Twilight Zone. I feel like it has shades of Outer Limits at times. So it kind of plays in my wheelhouse. So, but that's my only thing. It's like you said, Eric, that it's fairly high rated. That would be my only thought, is because the way they play this film out in conversations, the way that it has the kind of pacing that it has, it's not that it's slow necessarily, but it's just, I could see where some people would say, why are they talking so much? Nothing's happened, based off what Hollywood tells us that the young audiences want to see. I would imagine this film would be playing horrible with them.
Right.
But like I said, I found it to be terribly charming and entertaining. So that's my total take on A Vast of Night. I find it interesting, and if you're curious about it and you have Amazon Prime, give it a go. I don't see why not. And like I said, this lead actress here, I found her really intriguing, and I'd cast her as to play Marianne Red Skirts any day. I enjoyed watching her and the young gentleman who played the DJ. I thought they were terribly entertaining. So,
yeah, I totally agree, especially about the actress that we had pictured there. I thought she did a great job.
Very cool. All right, are we good to move into pop culture, do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Let me get the banner up.
All right, so we'll set this up real quick.
Oh, we're not talking about spoilers, so we can take that down.
Right. So here in the pop culture news segment, we talk about anything that's happening in the world of pop culture news that we find terribly relevant or interesting that we think you, our dear valued viewer or listener, should be aware of. Now, as I said earlier, I've got a lot going on, so I don't have a whole lot to contribute in the pop culture news segment. However, there is one thing that we do want to talk about. So I don't know if Eric, you want to set it up, or you want me to set it up. Maybe you should set it up because you felt like you said I was being mysterious.
Yeah. So for people that aren't aware, I think Dave did mention it a little bit cryptically a couple times on the show, that he's been working on a film project. And we finally know a little bit more. There has been an official announcement. As Dave mentioned, I felt that he's been terribly mysterious about this project, and I honestly haven't heard a whole lot about it, or hardly anything. But here's the poster for it. Obviously, I don't know a lot about this particular project, It is actually directed by Russ Emanuel, who I know very well. He's a personal friend of mine. He was the director for Occupants. And Occupants, for those who do not know, is a feature film that I was an associate producer on. I actually also did a lot of the behind-the-scenes camera work for that particular film. It's currently available on Tubi for free, as I like to mention quite often on the show. Russ directed that project. And apparently he collaborated with Dave again. In fact, Dave and I did a collaboration related to Occupants, which was the official Occupants tie-in, which Russ was the writer on. I was the editor on it and the co-publisher for the Occupants tie-in comic book. And yeah, honestly, Dave, I don't know much about this. In fact, I got an invite from Russ out of the blue, and he said that I'm invited to the premiere, which is going to be on Saturday via Zoom. So, I don't know much about it, and I'm not sure exactly what you can tell us about it, but it's definitely news to me.
Well, let me start off by saying I didn't get any clearances to talk about this at all, because Eric actually mentioned it right before we started to go live on the show. So let me just start off by saying I can't talk too much about my contribution to the film because it does actually impact the storytelling in a very particular way. I think for people who see the film, when they see what my contribution is, it makes a lot of logical sense. And I think people will enjoy it. I think the one safe thing to say is that most of the projects I've been involved with have always involved comic books in some form or some manner. For example, many years ago, I worked on a film called A Work of Art. And I really enjoyed that collaboration. Now, this is a short. I'm just hopefully excited for people to see it here really soon. I'm not trying to be cryptic or mysterious, but it's just my contribution is sort of so specific and works within the storytelling in a very specific manner that if I hint it too much, I think it would just kind of give things away. So when the film is hopefully out and people are able to watch it, you'll be able to clearly tell what my contribution is. It's not hidden at all. It'll be pretty obvious. And I just hope that people enjoy it. Just a little background on it, just briefly. I just received kind of a message from Russ out of the blue. We had enjoyed our collaboration with Eric because Eric was the one who actually brought me on to the Occupants project. I really enjoyed that collaborative effort. I enjoyed working on the Occupants comic. It was a high watershed moment for me personally and professionally. And I still feel like that it should have actually gotten some kind of a nod, if not actually have set a world record. I disagree with the Guinness people on that, but we could talk about that some other time. He just contacted me out of the blue. He pitched me on the idea, and I was like, "Wow, this sounds really fun. I would like to be involved in this." And so we just kind of started working from there. This is a different project than Occupants because I was kind of brought in while there was still a little bit of production actually going on, as opposed to Occupants where I came in after the film was finished. So this was different in that aspect. And as opposed to the comic, which is a very super exclusive limited item. So if you have one, value it and take care of it because there's not that many of them in circulation. A lot of people can't even experience that comic currently in any form unless you supported the project and actually backed the Kickstarter campaign for it, or Indiegogo campaign for it. But with this one, the thing that's really great is it's a part of the storytelling. And if you watch the film, you get to see it immediately. It's not like something you have to, you know what I mean? Kind of, try to find a copy of it. You will have to find a way to watch it. So that's kind of it. I don't want to, like I said, I didn't talk to Russ about it in advance. I'm very excited for the premiere this Saturday. I am planning to participate in that. And I'm just very excited for people to see it, and I hope people like it.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking to Russ about possibly reviewing it on the show. I haven't talked to him about it yet. He did invite me to the virtual premiere. As I mentioned, it's going to occur on Zoom. So I'll have more news next time if that's going to be a possibility or not. But this is Russ's official announcement here that I have shared on from the Twitter feed, and I did retweet this on my personal page. But it says new routine poster. We are happy to unveil the final poster for Routine as we start the film festival submission process. Thank you to the cast and crew for your hard work, and please stay safe, everyone. Go Team Routine. So I am definitely looking forward to seeing this film. I don't know exactly what I'm going to be allowed to say about it either, because as I didn't really have any involvement with this. So we'll see if it's something we can talk about more on the show. I also mentioned to Dave, since I have a film, a short film coming out pretty soon, it might be fun if we can review each other's films. So we'll see if that actually happens or not, because there are other people involved and we want to be cool with them and all that stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But I definitely reiterate what Bobby Chambers says, which is congrats, Dave. Bobby Chambers wants to congratulate you on working on the project. And Jane mentions again, she's mentioned previously, she does have a copy of that elusive Occupants Tie-in comic book. She does have one, which is, again, very, very hard to find, unfortunately.
And it's well, like I said, I'm excited for people to see the film, and we'll see what people think of it at that time. It was just kind of a fun project to be involved with. So like I said, this is unfortunately the totality of our contribution for pop culture news tonight. There was obviously some other things happening in the world of news and information and things that are going around. There's yet more controversy coming out of people saying things about the Snyder Cut and Joss Whedon. Just all kinds of crazy things we could be talking about. But I've been incredibly busy. Eric is aware of what's going on, so he knows what I've been working on. But hopefully everyone will find out next show. So tell me, Eric, what else do you have for this episode's installment of Pop Culture News?
Well, I do want to say good night to Bobby. Bobby says it's Ghostbusters at the drive-in tonight. Bobby, I'm so happy you at least got to see our review of Vast of Night, because you were the one that requested that. So he said it's Ghostbusters at the drive-in tonight. Want to make sure I was here for the start. As always, thank you guys. Bobby, thank you for the suggestion. Thank you for being here. And I guess this was great timing that we actually got the review in before Bobby has to go see his drive-in movie, which, by the way, that's awesome. I think that's really cool. I know that he lives on the west side of the Phoenix metro area, so I know the drive-in that he's going to. We've talked about that, about the comeback of the drive-ins that we're kind of hoping for and maybe actually seeing a little bit right now. So definitely, if you have a drive-in in your community, I totally encourage you to take advantage of that, because I think that's awesome. I would love to get my drive-in back. I don't think it'll ever happen, but there used to be a drive-in really close to me. It's not anymore, because I live on the opposite side of town from where Bobby lives. But thank you, Bobby. We appreciate the recommendation.
I was just going to say, Vast Night reminds you of one of those kind of films that you might have seen as a part of a double bill, at the drive-in back in the day. That film paired with another one. But no, yeah. Thanks for being here, Bobby, and glad you're able to be here to see the Vast Night review, since it was your suggestion. It's a very entertaining film, and I quite like the recommendation. So thank you.
Yeah, it's very, very cool.
So tell me, what do you have next actually for pop culture news?
So if I have a negative story, I kind of like to start out with that, so there's kind of no place to go but up. So I'm going to touch on this, and this is pretty controversial. And this is actually a story that was been going on for a while. I'm not sure if you heard about this, Dave, but here it is. This is from InsideTheMagic.net, and this was posted on June 28th of this year. And the headline reads, Stanley's daughter's suit against Marvel Company is thrown out. Now she owes $1 million. So we've got a picture here of the late, great Stan Lee, who I honestly, I can't say enough good things about. I had the pleasure of meeting Stan Lee at least once. I met him once, but I saw him in person numerous times at panels, at conventions. I always found him incredibly dynamic and entertaining, And to me, he's a true icon, a real legend. But for people that don't know, there was a lot of controversy before he died. Basically, after his wife died, there were all sorts of ugly things that came out, all sorts of ugly accusations that came out, basically amounting to elder abuse. It was a very sad state of affairs when Stan Lee died. And apparently, legally, the aftermath has still been going on with his daughter. And so this is what the article says. It says Stan Lee's daughter's lawsuit against Marvel icon company POW Entertainment has been tossed out, and now she owes them $1 million. It says since Stan Lee passed in 2018, his daughter, JC, Joan Celia Lee, has been involved in several court cases in an attempt to reclaim her father's intellectual property. However, her latest suit against Stan Lee's company, POW Entertainment, has been tossed out by Judge Otis Wright II of the Central District of California. Now she has been sanctioned $1 million by the court. Said Judge Wright ruled JC's suit was completely unreasonable, quote unquote, since it was based off the contention of a 1998 agreement between her father, Stan Lee, and POW Entertainment that had been debated and analyzed in more than 5 federal district courts over a decade, per the Hollywood Reporter. So the company's president, which is Gil Chapman, he is the co-founder of POW with Stan Lee back in 2001. His quote was, "We feel vindicated by the court's decision today. We are happy to finally put this ugly litigation behind us and move on to preserving the legacy of this great man and developing the large inventory of intellectual property he left behind. POW's commitment to honor and preserve Stan Lee's legacy has not and will not waver." So I guess the one positive spin of this story is apparently they are still committed, POW Entertainment is still committed to using some of these characters that Stan Lee created in the last part of his life. So I'm not sure if you heard about this story, Dave, but I am very curious what your take on it is.
Well, I'm going to say something that's going to sound maybe a little mean. They're talking about preserving the legacy of Stan Lee. Well, I think it's unfortunate what's apparently going to be happening to her daughter if she does, in fact, owe basically $1 million. Because that's an important part of Stan Lee's legacy, everybody. Just going to say that right there. Stan Lee's family was very important to him. And that's a part of any family's legacy, especially a father's legacy. So to say that they're going to preserve his legacy, and then to know that the flip side of this is that his daughter finds herself in the situation where she is, regardless of whether or not she should have should have still been kept bringing these charges or pursuing this. I think that's the unfortunate part of this story. The characters that were created when Stan Lee was POW Entertainment, because there's some controversy there too. Just going to say that there's been a lot of controversy
with POW
about what happened. So
I just read there've been 5 litigations. That's part of the issue is that they've gone to court basically 5 times over this. There's been all sorts of problems. Stan Lee was getting ripped off all over the place. I think we can just say that. Who was perpetuating it is the question. And there were allegations that his daughter was involved in perpetuating it as well. To be fair, there's just all sorts of allegations, and it's very hard to know what the truth is. This article also talks about one of his assistants was actually charged with elder abuse. You know what I mean? He was actually charged with elder abuse by the Los Angeles Police Department. So there's all sorts of allegations all over the place. And the bottom line is, I just feel so bad for what Stan Lee apparently had to go through in the last year or 2 of his life.
Yeah, this whole thing is just, I don't know. It's just unfortunate. I don't know. There's so many cases where the family tries to retain or reclaim or take some of the rights to these different properties, over the years. You've got the Siegel and the Schuster family. You've got the heartbreaking documentary called Batman and Bill, which is about, Bill Finger, and his lack of credit on Batman for so many years. And for example, well, not for example, let me give you a recommendation right now for people who find this news story interesting at all. While it's not related to Stan Lee, I'd highly recommend checking out the documentary that was on, I think it's on Hulu, Batman and Bill, which is about Bill Finger, who was the co-creator of Batman with Bob Kane. That's a really interesting documentary. If this kind of story you find interesting, definitely check out that documentary. But that's my total reaction to the story. It's full of a lot of unfortunate, things, because of everything that came out that was happening to Stan at the time he was with Pow, the circumstances about how their association dissolved, the whole thing with his daughter. Like this whole thing is just an unfortunate news story to me. That's just the whole thing. But all I'm going to say is that I feel like, I'm sure as a business it's great to feel vindicated, like we won, but at the same point too, to say we're going to preserve the legacy of Stan Lee when you're basically taking his daughter to the woodshed to the tune of $1 million, that doesn't sound right. Just saying, maybe let this dog lie a little bit more and then come out with a new thing and then say, look at this amazing new thing we have for preserving the legacy of Stan Lee. Again, that's just my opinion, just my personal opinion, just reacting to the news story. So that's it. I don't want to get in any trouble myself with these people, but just saying.
Well, I don't think they're going to be coming after our show anytime soon. I will say this, in terms of the creative aspect of this story, because the idea that some of these later creations of Stan Lee might come to light, I'm actually very curious to see how that will fly without Stan the man himself. I mean, I think there's just no doubt, as great as some of the characters are that Stan Lee helped to create, because, he basically was a co-creator, especially on all the great characters that we think of, like X-Men, Spider-Man. There were people that he collaborated with, just as you were mentioning. Bob Kane collaborated with Bill Finger on Batman, and a lot of that was obscured. But Stan Lee has a co-credits basically with all of his best known projects. But one of the things people forget, because there's that kind of controversy too, like, was Stan hamming it up? Was he taking too much of the credit? But the truth of the matter is, a big reason that these characters succeeded was because of Stan Lee's ability to be that master showman and promoter. And people forget that. It wasn't just the great art or whatever, you know what I mean? I would really make that argument when people say that, because there are a lot of detractors of Stan Lee now. There were during his lifetime even. He doesn't get universal acclaim from everyone because, there's always that argument. Well, what about the other guy? You know what I mean? Well, the fact of the matter is, I truly believe that one of the big reasons that these properties were so successful was because he was such a great showman and promoter. And he was awesome at it. And anytime you saw him speak, he was so articulate. And so I kind of wonder, without the man, will these characters really take on just with the name? That's kind of one thing that I wonder about too, with the future of these projects that I don't even know what they are. You know what I mean? Because I don't think they've been released. So it'd be kind of interesting for me to see, and maybe we'll see that in the future when we see something with the POW logo on it. It's like, I wonder if this is going to be like in the bargain bin, or if it's really going to take off without Stan Lee himself there to promote it.
Well, we'll see. And just for clarity, Scott Clark and I actually did covers for Stan Lee's The Traveler series. It was over at Boom.
Awesome.
So I, while I saw Stan Lee from across the room and I didn't get to necessarily say hi to him on a couple of occasions, we did kind of sort of once upon a time work on a project together. So
that's awesome. That's super awesome. Now, James is out there lurking, he says. Sorry, I've been lurking while working. Well, James, we appreciate that, and we understand if you're lurking while working, and we encourage that. You know what I mean? So we understand if you can't quite give us your full attention. Now, I don't know exactly what James does for a living, but still, if you are at work or something like that, we understand if you have to kind of come in and out, and you may not know exactly what we're talking about. We still appreciate you being here. I don't think we've seen James comment in a while, so it's good to see you commenting on the show. We're glad to see you there. And then also, Portronics is in the house. That's my friend Matt. That's the person that I'm working with on this film, Connection Established. He said, sorry I'm late. He was looking at a rough cut of the short. Wow, Matt, you're looking at a rough cut of the short and you haven't included me? What's up with that? Come on, man. I'm your partner on this project. So I guess we have a rough cut. Well, that's live breaking news here on the show. So our film project is moving forward. Matt, you definitely just send that to me. Definitely just send that to me, Portronics, because I want to take a look at that. I always, I got final approval as well, right? We co-produced this thing. So, and then Matt does comment, Portronics Films comments on Stan Lee and says, they will never have the exceptional same effect if he's not directly involved. And that's kind of what I was alluding to with Stan Lee is I don't think you can I think the magic is very much as he made great characters, they're iconic. Part of the reason they're iconic is because of him, because of Stan Lee, because of, just like I said, he was an amazing promoter, Excelsior, all that kind of stuff. He was the face of Marvel for so many years, even stuff he didn't create. He was the face of the company for so many years. So, we'll see. That's kind of the sentiment I had.
Well, and I was going to mention, I know that James is busy because he's got a couple of different projects he's working on. And I want to say the name of them is like Soul Comics or Soul Food Comics. I'm probably saying that wrong. I was just on Facebook trying to find a direct link, but he shares so much amazing art. I'm having a hard time finding it. But so I know he's got a lot of projects going on too. So I understand that because I was just talking about with Bass Knight being, trying to do two things at once. So I definitely feel you there. And I'd have to say an important part of any project, in all honesty, at the end of the day, it's not just the marketing, but it is sort of that person who can actually go out and sell it. So many projects are built upon the strength of that person who makes that deal. For example, again, going back to these documentaries I like to talk about, there's a really interesting one about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And one of the big linchpins when you're actually, watching that documentary is that the comics were highly successful. But it was that guy who believed in it, who had that crazy stuffed turtle that he was driving around with in his car. That was the guy who sold it. He went around and actually sold that idea. He's the one who got the toy deal. He's the one who helped get the animation deal. And that's kind of the thing. It's a really important component. That's an important part of any entertainment project is that person who goes out and sells that project and actually gets it made or gets it done or gets it to that next step. That person is vitally important. And that's the role that Stan Lee always played in all the projects that he was involved with.
Yeah, and that's just so true, and you see that with businesses all the time. I mean, you see that with creative people all the time as well, whether they be engineers. And I saw it with my own father. You know what I mean? My dad was a great engineer, but he wasn't a good salesman, and he wasn't a good promoter. You know what I mean? And so you kind of need to have that dynamic. And a lot of people dismiss it sometimes. You know what I mean? And just say, oh, whatever. The guy was a shyster. In fact, the person you're talking about, he actually admits that he had no background in any of that stuff. He just kind of was there at the right moment, and he went with it. He went for it. You know what I mean? He took his opportunity, and that's from The Toys That Made Us, which, by the way, I really enjoyed that episode about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Toys That Made Us. That's an interesting series. Maybe one of these days we'll have to review some of those episodes or something like that, because that is an interesting series, and the one about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is fascinating. If you guys anybody's into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at all, that first episode of The Toys That Made Us on Netflix tells you a lot.
And there's actually too, there's a total separate documentary just about TMNT too. That's a little bit, I think it's just shy of 2 hours, maybe an hour, 40 minutes. I forget the actual run time. I can't remember the name of it, to tell you the truth, but that documentary is really interesting too. There's some really cool ones that touch on these kind of things that are fun to watch. I rediscovered one actually recently talking about Amazon Prime. There's I think it's Comic Book Confidential, which is this really old comics documentary that's I think was originally made back in the 80s. That one's really interesting too, and that one's crazy. I think it's still circulating on I think Amazon Prime. I'll have to look into that to make sure I'm telling people correctly. But I love all that kind of stuff, and I always find it really interesting. But if you pay attention to all of those stories, there's always that person at who like helped get it to that next stage. It's always that person who actually helps sell someone, whether it's a company, whether it's a person, whether it's the public, on the idea. And that's what helps the idea actually, take off. You need that person. It's very important. So
Yeah,
at least
absolutely.
at least that's my opinion. So
No, I mean that's just the fact. Like I said, a lot of people dismiss that, but it's just a fact. Marketing is important, folks, especially if you want to make any money in this business. So it's just the reality. If you want to make money in any business, marketing is important. Being able to sell the product, to sell yourself, all that stuff, and it's a talent. It really is. Some people can do it, and some people can't. You know what I mean? You can have all the talent in the world, but if you can't do that, well, you're going to have a hard time. You know what I mean? You're going to have a hard time. There's just no doubt about it. But there's another interesting project that came to my attention that I thought you would find interesting, Dave. You and I have reviewed the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance on the show. We're both fans of that show. And this is from Movieweb.com. And this was posted on June 28th, very recently. And the headline reads, The Dark Crystal Bestiary. Bestiary? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. No, Bestiary. Bestiary? The Dark Crystal Bestiary book serves as definitive guide to the creatures of Thra. So this is a new book that's coming out, and I believe it's supposed to be related to the Dark Crystal and the Age of Resistance, although most of the images here I see are from the Age of Resistance. It says, in a world where rocks talk and trees dispense wisdom from across the ages, anything is possible. The Dark Crystal Bestiary is a comprehensive volume catalogs the many life forms of Thra's unique ecosystem, from the vile Skeksis and their noble counterparts, the Mystics, to a whole cornucopia of amazing creatures and critters, including Landstriders, Garthim, which I think I'm butchering that one, Peeper Beetles, Fezgigs, Puffum, and many more fan favorites. So it says it's drawing from all aspects of the Dark Crystal Saga universe, including the hit Netflix show The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. This book features all new illustrations by Iris Compiette, a protege of the original Dark Crystal concept artist Brian Froud. I'm not pronouncing that right, am I?
It's Brian Froud.
Froud. Which, by the way, that's my one disappointment about this book, is that he didn't do it, because I know he did the original, so much of the original concept art and everything like that, and he did his own book as well. That I think it's still in print. I know it's kind of a pricey book. I think you might. Do you own it, Dave? Do you own his book?
I own an original copy of it. Yes.
Yeah, there you go. So this is another one that they're making. It's kind of like, I think, meant to be sort of an update, on his book. That obviously incorporates the new characters and things like that. You can see some of the images here, which I think are they're pretty cool. I always like books like this because I like source books. I've always enjoyed source books and, books like this that show you pictures of the characters and give you descriptions. Because when I have stuff like this, it really helps me make up my own little stories in my head. As a kid, I really liked doing that. I would like making up little stories in my head about these different worlds and things like that. So I really enjoy this material. This article has a lot of images, so you can really get a good feel for what's in this book and whether it's something for you or not. But I really enjoy this kind of material. What about you, Dave?
I love art books. I love any sort of concept design books of any kind. I've shown actually on the show. I think the probably the more recent acquisitions I purchased I really like is I got a copy of the Transformers. It has all the packaging art from the original toys. That one's really cool. I showed the He-Man one, which was really interesting. The Masters Universe one's got a lot of really great stuff in it. It's very, very in depth. And then a recent purchase I got really dirt cheap that I really enjoyed is actually the Watchmen one, all about the film. And it was, again, it's I love concept art books. I have a very extensive collection of them. Um, and I just love seeing all the behind the scenes stuff. And as you mentioned, I do actually own a copy of the original one that Brian Farrell actually did all the art for. And that one's interesting too because it actually gets into a lot of the astrology aspect of the Dark Crystal, and actually weaves in a lot of this. I'm going to call it symbology, which the way that Brian Froud worked symbols and shapes that represent different ideas and different concepts and different characters into not only the design of the characters, but into the world, and how all of it, again, harkens back to this idea of astrology and this ancient world that's been around forever. It's really, really terribly interesting, and I highly, highly recommend that book. And this looks very interesting. So like I said, I love this kind of stuff. I'm all about this kind of stuff. So this looks cool to me.
Yeah, I would agree. That's something that I think is, really interesting. The prior book I always wanted, but as I think it's pretty expensive. It's pretty pricey. This one is coming out in the hardcover edition, October 13th, 2020. It is listed on Amazon, and the hardcover price is $26.99. Which I'm assuming this is kind of like going to be like a kind of an oversized book or something like that. Generally, those art books are, but it does look like something that I myself might consider picking up. So I thought anybody who's a fan of Dark Crystal or basically Dark Crystal: The Age of Resistance might enjoy this and might enjoy knowing about it.
Very cool. So I am gonna break my rule because I said I wasn't going to do this tonight, but let me fire this up here real quick. We'll see if this works. I wasn't going to go on cam tonight because I look like a mess, but I was going to showcase actually and just show off this book here real quick. Let me turn my cam on. And yeah, I look horrible. There you go. Yeah. There you go. So yeah, it's The World of Dark Crystal. If you guys can see that, this is actually the book. And I wanted to show this, and this book is falling apart because I've looked at it so much. I wanted to show this concept so you guys can see what I was talking about symbols. So if you see right here, actually on Agra, these kind of over tracings of these symbols, this idea, this concept, and then he connects it back to these ideas about how these symbols represent the characters and the worlds and the concepts actually within the film. And then there's all these really amazing sort of overlays. You see it here on actually this page. There's these really cool overlays, and it kind of helps to illustrate a concept. And then you see what actually comes underneath so that you can see what they're trying to show you in terms of how it connects and how it relates actually to the world and the concept in which it plays out. There's tons of this stuff in here. So this book is really amazing, especially for people who love world building and concept art. I highly, highly recommend it. It is a pricey book, but in my opinion, it's definitely worth it because this for me, whenever I'm concept designing and I'm looking at stuff, I'm constantly referencing it. And it does have a lot of what they're showing in the other book, like a lot of the character design stuff in it too. But the thing that makes this one kind of unique that I wonder if it may be reflected in the other one is this idea of these shapes and concepts and how they play them out actually throughout the world and how they connect all the different themes and the ideas and the concepts graphically and again visually into the narrative. So there you go. But yeah, I highly recommend this book. I know years ago, I can't remember his name. He's a very well-respected cartoonist and artist. And again, this book is so old, the glue's breaking apart. He talked about like books he would recommend that every artist or designer have. And he recommended like the concept book for Zootopia. He recommended the one from the Neil Blomkamp film, District 9. That book is also really great. I own that book as well. But this is one of those books I say is worth the price of admission. And again, this is The World of the Dark Crystal by Brian Froud. So,
and as far as you know, is that book still in print, Dave?
I don't think it is, or if it is, there's maybe a newer version of it that's in print. If it is, I think it's been out of print for quite some time. But it's it's worth picking up and paying the premium price for it if design and storytelling is something you're into. Like, for example, like you see, it's not coming across very well, but see how they've got these overlays and these things on the Skeksis talking about how these symbols connect back to the narrative. It's really interesting. I'd show you a little bit better, but literally this book is falling apart. I'm actually putting it back together. But no, yeah, this is amazing stuff. So even though it is an out of print rare book, it's totally worth buying if you're into fantasy art and illustration. So
now what's the title of that one?
It is the World of the Dark Crystal by Brian Froud. And then this one, let's see. What was the publication date on this one? This is 1982. I think this is the first. Yeah, this is a first edition from 1982. But no, yeah, this book is amazing. So
I am seeing here on Amazon there is the Dark Crystal, the Ultimate Visual Guide, and it does say the hardcover version is $21.49. And Brian Froud it's Brian and Wendy Froud are credited on that one.
Okay, he's had a lot of amazing books. Brian Froud's worked on a lot of cool fantasy stuff over the years. They actually, for a couple years, I don't think they've done it in quite some time, but when my wife and I, when we first moved actually out to Arizona, they used to do a fairy festival out here of all things. And he and his wife were often in attendance at that festival. And I tried to make it out there. I know they did it at least 2 or 3 years in a row. And I kept trying to make it out there to actually hopefully have the opportunity to maybe meet him and just discuss with him his fancy illustration for just a brief period of time. And I never got the opportunity. Whenever they were putting it on, by the time I found out about it, it was too late.
Yeah, the one I found is actually by somebody else. He's just credited, I think, because he created so many of the images. So I wish I could have found that. I guess you're right. It doesn't seem like it is in print anymore. But because that's one that I was interested in as well. But I always just remember it being really expensive, and that's why I never got it.
Well, and I only have a copy because it was bought back in the day, before, I think, in all honesty, the Dark Crystal, I mean, it caught on with a group of fans, but I don't think it really attained sort of the cult status that it has now until obviously much later. Because when this book was purchased, it cost $14.95. It's an amazing $14.95. So it's an amazing book, but again, literally it was bought when it was, Dark Crystal was new, so that's, why there's
Dark Crystal was not a terribly successful movie when it came out. It was
that's true.
I think regarded as a bomb. So
yeah, the most expensive rare book I've actually bought is actually a early edition of Masoyama's This is Karate. And I paid $125 for that book. But that's just because I love books. So there you go.
So you own fine leather-bound books, huh?
Well, actually, I don't think that's the funny thing. I don't think any of them are leather-bound. They're just old.
That's a line from Anchorman. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
I have. It's been a while.
He's trying to impress the girl, and he's all like, "I have fine leather-bound books." And, so, I always like that line.
There you go.
But did you have anything else for pop culture? Because if not, I think it would be good to move on to streaming wars.
No, I that's pretty much it. I am good to move over to streaming wars. Let me switch the banner real quick, and then we'll set it up. So, okay, so here we are. We're talking about streaming wars. Now, you may ask yourself, what do you mean by streaming wars? We're obviously talking about all the things going on in the world of streaming video or streaming media. So we're talking about some of those things that you probably very familiar with, things like Netflix, things like Hulu we mentioned earlier, or even that new thing that Eric is just discovering calling Amazon Prime. I'm sure he knew about it before. I'm just giving him a hard time. But this also includes those newer things too, like HBO Go or Max or whatever they're calling it these days. Anyhow, anything that's going on in the world of streaming wars that we think you, our dear valued viewer or listener, will find interesting and worth discussing. So, tell me, Eric, what have you got up first for this episode's edition of the Streaming Wars?
Well, it looks like we may be getting a casualty from the streaming wars. I don't think they've quite thrown in the towel yet, but what I'm hearing is they're very close. And here's my source. This is an article from The Guardian. Let's see, this was dated Monday, June 29th. And we've talked about this platform before. Neither you or I think, have actually used it, but we have talked about it on the show. I don't think we were terribly impressed, and it sounds like that seems to be the consensus right now. So the headline reads, "The Fall of Quibi. How did a starry $1.75 billion Netflix rival crash so fast?" And by the way, I'm not sure if I agree with this, because we've done some coverage on Quibi before, and I don't think they were ever really meant to take on Netflix. In fact, I think they kind of had a somewhat unique approach in that really what they were taking on was YouTube. We've talked about this before, that basically YouTube dominates the mobile streaming space. In other words, on this thing. So if you watch a lot of videos and stuff like that on your phone, everything that I've read tells me that you're probably using YouTube. Now, at this point, you might be using like TikTok, because I know like my kids love TikTok. So those things are really popular on the phone. So Quibi was actually meant to compete in that space, which we talked about months ago in a previous article. YouTube completely dominates that space way more than even Netflix. I mean, they just completely dominate it. Nobody comes close. So it's interesting. I think that the article is a little bit misleading, you know what I mean? But it says Jeffrey Katzenberg's short-form content platform has struggled to make an impact with bad reviews, lack of interest, and legal issues swirling, which is interesting. So apparently they were even having legal problems. So what this article talks about is they had a 90-day free trial for this platform, and it kind of exploded. In terms of that 90-day free trial. But now it looks like with that 90-day free trial over, people really aren't staying. And it's just crazy to me, because they got so much money to do this platform. And I think for you and me, Dave, this was like a non-starter to begin with. I don't think you and I really ever had that much interest in this.
Yeah, there was nothing on Quibi, whatever they want to call it. There was nothing on this platform that really caught my attention. And the idea of it being sort of quick bite content, 10 minutes or less, like you said, there's tons of that stuff already on YouTube. So you have to really be producing terribly, terribly entertaining, interesting content, to really pull people from YouTube or to get them to consider, and it's weird too, because YouTube did a pretty amazing job of shooting themselves in the face at the same time that Quibi was launching. So, unfortunately, this doesn't take off with people. And I think it's, at the end of the day, it's just like everything else. It's all about the quality of the content, and it's about what you're doing. And
well, it's funny because this talks about the content. Like you said, I have it highlighted here. These are supposed to be quick bites, hence the name Quibi, QB, whatever that's supposed to be. By the way, I think that is one of the problems with it. It's like, I don't even know how to pronounce it. These are supposed to be 10-minute or less clips. It says they had a Joe Jonas talk show. They had a documentary on LeBron James' I Promise School. A movie with Game of Thrones Sophie Turner surviving a plane crash. They actually had a movie on this thing. It was a 10-minute movie. By the way, I don't understand how that works exactly. And it was all straight to your phone. So, you would think that maybe that would bring some people in. But, it's kind of the cautionary tale that I say about Netflix. Or not Netflix, I'm sorry, about YouTube. The cautionary tale that I talk about YouTube, which I think this platform was actually more meant to compete with. Because, again, that mobile space, everything that I've read or heard says that YouTube dominates it. It's kind of funny because we talk a lot on our show about how YouTube seems to kind of be pushing away a lot of the independent creators that built the platform. And it's really why people go to YouTube for the most part. I know people do go there for pirated stuff and all sorts of other things, but really the thing that's built YouTube in my mind is all the independent creators and these smaller shows that have, don't have like necessarily a big, huge following. Some of them do. Some of them have millions of subscribers, but it's just a guy talking about movies or doing trailer reviews or something like that. Some of those channels are huge. Doomcock has over 150,000 subscribers. He's a great example. Nerdrotic, I think, has over 200 subscribers now. You know what I mean? And these are just guys talking about movies and TV shows and giving you their 2 cents. And that, to me, has really built the platform. But what YouTube keeps doing is they keep shoving corporate swill down your throat. And it seems like Quibi just basically said, okay, we're just going to be all corporate swill. We're going to be nothing but big names and all that kind of stuff. We're going to give it to you in a small format, and we're going to rock it. Apparently, it's not working. So the question becomes, why is YouTube continue to push this failed model?
Well, the answer to that question is who knows. I assume I assume that's where they think the money is. I mean, to be honest with you, a lot of these companies, if you notice,
$2 billion, Dave, $2 billion down the toilet, it looks like.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. You see it with all of these different. Well, you see it everywhere. Eventually, everyone starts running after what they think is "quote unquote" the big money, and that's usually always the mistake. Once you start just going after just the big money, without thinking about sort of the unique curated content that you're creating, without thinking about your specific unique brand and the niche that it serves, and ideally, your customers, your clients, the people that you're trying to reach are hopefully the people that you've connected with. Once you stop thinking about them and you just start thinking about the money, that's when everybody makes a misstep. And I've been involved with creative ventures where it's the same thing. As long as we were working on the project or we were thinking about the people that would hopefully love it, we had something interesting going on. But once it just turned into just only thinking about the money and not thinking about anything else, that's always when it tripped itself up every single time. Now, a business needs to make money in order to sometimes exist. Obviously, that makes sense. I'm a big believer in that, advertising should exist in order to help prop up or support or be a part of something else. Going back to when people used to sponsor, Kellogg's was the sponsor of Adventures of Superman, that kind of idea. I'm a big believer in that. But this thing, I think it just started. It's like, we're just going to get all the A-level content creators and it's going to be great. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this idea fail. You can't just go run and just go get the A content, whoever, whatever, blah, 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 and it just immediately succeed. The idea still has to be there. The content has to be there. And you have to think about who you're actually trying to connect with. That's so important. Who are you trying to reach? Just throwing money at something doesn't always work. It'll prop it up for a little while, but it goes back to that old thing they taught me back in Bible school about, you never build your house on the sand.
Right.
You got to build it on a rock.
Foundation.
And,
well, to be fair, this platform it hasn't thrown in the towel yet, but here's some of the numbers from the articles that kind of show you the position they're in. It said the app staggered early, falling out of the top 50 most downloaded within a week of its launch. So within a week of its launch, They weren't even one of the top 50 downloads. This is an almost $2 billion company. This is staggering. And you can't be in the top 50 downloads with almost $2 billion. It said it only attracted 1.5 million active users by the end of May. And that's according to the Wall Street Journal. That's compared to, say, like Disney Plus, which has 50 million subscribers. Because Disney Plus is a good comparison because we're talking about similar time frames. Disney Plus came out earlier, but it's still it's still considered one of the new breed that's, fighting for Netflix space, right? They launched in December 2019. Netflix, by comparison, has 183 million global users. I mean, so this is staggering. Now, it says most of those users were on the service's free trial, which I talked about earlier, which ends this month. And it says a subscription, because this is not ad-based. That's important to remember. This is a subscription-based service. It's $4.99 a month. But you can get an ad package. I'm sorry, that's $4.99 a month with ads, which, by the way, I think folks know I hate that. Like, I hate paying for ads. I just can't stand that. So it's $4.99 with ads, $7.99 without ads. And just right there, it's like, why would I be doing this when I can go to YouTube for free?
Well, this goes back to that idea. I mean, it all comes back to content. I pay for CBS All Access, and I pay for the service with ads because I love Star Trek, and that's where a lot of the Star Trek is. Now, if CBS All Access didn't have Star Trek, would I be paying for it? I don't know. Maybe not. And see, that's at the end of the day, that's what I keep coming back to. It for me anyway, not everyone, but for me, it's all about the content. If you have something great that I want to watch, I'll pay for it. I have a subscription to Hulu, everybody, because that's where I needed to go to watch Space 1999. Space 1999 isn't even on Hulu anymore, and that's what I signed up for Hulu for, is because I wanted to watch Space 1999, and at the time, that's where I had to sign up to watch Space 1999. Now it's where you can go watch Justified. So there's a trade-off. You can at least go watch Justified now. but see, for me, that's the thing that's key. For example, the HBO Go Max, I forget what it's called, the HBO service.
HBO
I'm
Go.
waiting. I'm waiting for the Snyder Cut. For the Snyder Cut. Once the Snyder Cut's there, I'm down. Let's check it out. Let's see what's going on.
Incidentally, I sent you a message that they're now giving it free to AT&T subscribers, which I am an AT&T subscriber, so I now have access to HBO Go, and I don't think that was the original plan. So that's kind of interesting to me too, because I only got that notification last week that I'm eligible for HBO Go for free. So I'm curious whether that was something they just didn't talk about, or if that's something that they just recently added, which can also kind of show you where they're at. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, again, I had this conversation actually with someone at the day job today. We had a conversation about this very idea, that these services, that when they launch, they have to have something really great, to help propel it forward, to help, build an audience or a following. YouTube has
they also, as the Rogues Gallery points out, Matt, they also have a name that you can understand. It says, because Portronics Film Production says they began to fail because of their name, Quibi or whatever. It is a confusing name. There's no doubt about that. I don't know how to pronounce it. So,
am I the only one that sees the little weird Quiznos roadkill characters every time? Every time you say QB, I keep seeing those little guys going, "You should watch our service."
By the way, there is a network called Quibi, which is a kids network. My kids used to watch it all the time. It's one of those digital sub channels. So that's what I always think of when I see this, because there is a network called Quibi. You know what I mean? So that's why I call it Quibi, because I assume it's not, they don't use the same pronunciation of an existing network, but I don't even know.
See, I either think of the little Quiznos roadkill guys, or I'm thinking that somehow this is connected to the Home Shopping Network. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's weird. The branding is odd. The end, it's supposed to be quick bits. That's what the name is supposed to mean. I didn't know that until I read this article. I had no idea. Jane mentions, by the way, that she gets Disney Plus free with Verizon. And that's also another good point, which a lot of people are wondering about these great numbers that Disney Plus has right now. Well, what's going to happen when all the Verizon customers lose their year free trial?
Well, we will see. Luckily, Disney Plus has The Mandalorian to help keep them afloat.
I will say this. One thing that this platform could have done, and I talked about it when it first came out, the thing I liked about the 10-minute format is, look what we were talking about earlier. Both of you and I are involved with making some short films. I would love to have a market that I could show my short films. And I think the mobile market could be a good one. You know what I mean? Where people would be willing to sit down for 10, 15 minutes and watch a short film. And it seems to me that Quibi never gave independent creators that opportunity. I don't know. I haven't used it, but I haven't heard of any quote unquote kind of viral videos from small filmmakers. I hear about this stuff with LeBron James and Sophie Turner. You know what I mean? Nothing about something with an independent filmmaker that brought a short film and suddenly it becomes a big thing on Quibi. You know what I mean?
Well, and you could take that concept even further. It's like, why didn't they try to court some of these people that YouTube ran off? Why did they try to court some of these, mid-tier in terms of viewership numbers, not content, mid-tier, creators that have a little bit of a platform on YouTube? Why not give them a little bit of a platform on here and then mix it up? Maybe you've got some independent film stuff. You've got some, YouTube, not just personalities, but I'm talking about the really interesting, you know what I mean? Not the PewDiePie or whatever the hell it's called, but, like some of the people who are doing the movie discussion shows and whatever, get some of them actually on your service and then have your Sophie Turner and your LeBron James.
I can answer that question because the people that are going to give you $2 billion don't care about any of that stuff because they're very short-sighted. You know what I mean? They want the big name. You're not going to get $2 billion talking about those kind of outlets. That's just the reality of it. I think those kind of people are very short-sighted, and you see it all the time. They're willing to waste their money on this stuff because they're hoping it's going to be the next big thing. We're going to rival Netflix. Yeah, right. You know what I mean? Because we got LeBron James. We got Sophie Turner, and they had others too. I know. Actually, I think the one that actually caught my attention was they were doing another season of Reno 911. That actually did catch my attention, but it wasn't enough for me to subscribe to it.
And yet, you can hear the money circling the drain. There you go.
And Portronics Film Productions mentions it's time for us to create just that. And there you go. The gauntlet is thrown, Dave. We need to create our own service that we can do, short films and things like that on.
Well, I don't have $2 billion. I've got $20. So.
Hey, you got to start somewhere, right? You got to start somewhere. Now, I do have one more article, and this one's actually kind of fun, and it relates to, as you mentioned, my new awakening to Amazon Prime, because I didn't have it before. This is the first time that I'm trying out Amazon Prime. I'm doing it specifically for the show, for all of you out there, and also for my partner Dave, so we can review some more content. In fact, the next segment after this, it's a recommendation from Dave, and that's why one of the reasons I got Amazon Prime, along with Bobby's suggestion of Vast of Night, because that's also only available on Amazon Prime. But I have another article here related to Amazon Prime that I thought was interesting. I don't know if you heard about this, Dave. This is very similar to an article we talked about before regarding Netflix Party. Well, Amazon Prime now has its own version. This is from TechCrunch.com. Amazon Prime Video introduces Watch Party, a social co-viewing experience included with Prime. Were you aware of this, Dave?
I was not. I was aware of where they're trying to do this in different places. Like, for example, like someone could be having a watch party right now for the Retro Rogue show, for example. I have accidentally created a watch party for the Retro Rogues channel by accident, trying to share a video.
That was Facebook, right? You did it on
Facebook. I'm sorry, Facebook. And, this goes back even further because wasn't that a big selling point for some of the early Blu-ray stuff? I forget which one it was, but there was one of them that supposedly had built into it. I think it was the Warner service. They had one where that was kind of the big selling point. Like you could watch Watchmen with you and your friends and comment on it and stuff. I forget which service that was, but this idea's been around for a while.
It has that feature on it, which I don't think works anymore. But I feel like I have something in my collection that actually had that. So Amazon Prime Video is beginning to roll out a co-viewing feature to Amazon Prime members in the U.S. The company announced that when this article was published, which was, let's see, June 29th. So that was when they made that announcement. It's included at no cost with the Prime membership, of course, which does have a cost. It allows participants to watch video content together at the same time with the playback synchronized to the host's account. The host of the co-watching session will be able to start, stop, and pause the watch party as needed throughout the session. And those changes will also be synced to all participant devices instantly. Each session can also support up to 100 participants, as long as those participants also have a Prime membership and are watching from within the US. So if you don't live in the US, you need a VPN if you want to participate. And so while the video is playing, users can socialize with other participants through a built-in chat that supports both text and built-in emojis, of course. It has to support emojis, right? At launch, Watch Party is offered via Prime Video on the desktop and is supported across thousands of titles in the Prime Video SVOD, that's subscription video on demand catalog. This includes a lot of third-party content that comes with Prime, as well as a lot of Amazon originals. I'm not going to list them all. There's a bunch listed there of Amazon originals. Titles available only for rent or purchase are not available within Watch Party at this time. To get started with Watch Party, customers will click on the new Watch Party icon on the movie or show's page on the Prime Video desktop website. So my guess is it doesn't work with my PlayStation 4, which for those of you that don't know, that's my preferred way of viewing movies and content is I use the apps on my PlayStation 4. So it looks like that feature is not available for my PlayStation 4 right now. You have to go to the desktop website. So you have to be viewing it on your computer, your laptop, that kind of a thing. This one does mention, I'll get a little farther here, about some of the other ones, and we've talked about one of them. They said they also have obviously a browser extension called Netflix Party, which we've covered on a previous Streaming Wars segment. So that's also available. Soon it says all the streamers, it said HBO has partnered with a browser extension maker called Scener to offer a virtual theater experience for co-watching that supports up to 20 people. So it's not like 100 people like Amazon Prime. Hulu more recently launched its own native watch party feature for its no ad subscribers. So there's that caveat. Like I have Hulu with the Disney Plus package, but it has ads in it. So it looks like I'm kind of out of luck there. But media software Plexa also rolled out a co-watching support around the same time. So some of this stuff is third party, which is interesting as well. It said Amazon had already offered a way to co-watch some of its Prime Video titles before this launch. And they did that through Twitch, which I didn't realize. So there was a Twitch watch party that had, it said, across more than 70 Amazon Prime Video titles. And I wish I was aware of that before this because, you know, I've talked about we really need to try to do something with our Twitch account because it's really, you know, hardly active right now and that kind of stuff. I don't know, that might have been an interesting way to try to grab some people in is to do a watch party. But this is something you and I have played with and talked about ever since you talked about Netflix watch party. And I don't know, maybe this is something that we might look into, especially now that I have Amazon Prime, to do in an official Retro Rogues format.
Yeah, I think a watch party idea would be fun. Then we could torture people with my selection of Split Second, and people could complain about how awful the movie is, and and that I have poor taste in film. So there you go. That sounds like a lot of fun, Eric.
Well, I can't compete with that. That's about the best segue that I think we could do for our next main segment, Dave.
Well, all right. Okay, so I've got the graphic up if you want to share my screen. All right, everybody, here it is. I know that I am eagerly anticipating Eric's thoughts on this film. Um, I know that some people did not like this film when it originally came out. A little bit of history on this film, just real briefly. One of the things that I found interesting about this film is that this film was produced on a relatively modest budget. I actually first read about this film actually in Starlog magazine. I like to talk about, even going back to the Retro Retrospective show, I like to talk about where I first heard about these films. And obviously, that's an important part of a Retro Retrospective. So, in a Retro Retrospective, what we want to do is we want to start off by talking about how we first heard about the film, our initial impressions of the film, and then we want to talk about how we feel about the film today, having actually recently rewatched it. So here for this particular,
We need to back up here because we're changing the format a little bit here.
I know.
Okay, so the format's a little bit different. And in this case, what we're doing is this is a recommendation that Dave actually made to me because I've never seen this show. So this is kind of a little. I've never seen this movie, I should say. Sorry, it wasn't a TV show; it's a movie. So I've never seen this, and so it's going to be interesting. So Dave is really going to talk about his experience about this. He's going to let you know why he recommended it to me, why he likes this movie. He talk about its history and all that stuff, and then you're going to hear from me completely fresh because I have never seen this movie before, never heard of it if it wouldn't have been for Dave. So with that, Dave, take it away.
All right. So I first heard about this film in Starlog magazine back in the day. This was featured along with another film called Nemesis, and it was by sort of a young or sort of recently formed production company. They had a feature on this and the other film. Now, I read the story and I thought it sounded interesting. I actually did see this movie in movie theaters, everyone. I did actually pay to go see this in movie theaters. I went with a good friend of mine at the time. And we went and saw this film. And I had known a little bit about it. And I found it kind of interesting because they kept referring to, quote unquote, the rat catcher kind of here and there in the article. They don't really reference that too much in this film at all, if not any, as far as I can. Just recently rewatched this. I'm trying to remember. I don't think they referenced it at all. But it's an interesting idea because it was a villain in the Batman comics at the same time that they used that nomenclature with, the rat catcher. So I was very intrigued by this film. And they'd shown some images. And then if you see this film, the monster in the film, because this is kind of like a low budget B horror movie, monster movie. I think that's the best way to describe it, as sort of a low rent B monster movie. The villain, the monster, is very reminiscent of Venom at the time. And a lot of people who saw it, that's what they kept talking about, is that the villain in this reminded of Venom. Which actually, if you go further back, I think this inspiration for this monster actually comes from some illustrations by H.R. Giger. Actually, if you dial it further back. But I'll set this up just here real briefly, and I'll talk about why I recommended this film and what I like about it, and then we'll see what Eric thought. I think I have a feeling where we're going here, but we're gonna still stay positive here at the moment. So Split Second, again, this is an older film. It came out in 1992. It's considered an action crime horror film. Synopsis, just real briefly, it says, in a flooded future London, Detective Harley Stone hunts a serial killer who murdered his partner and has haunted him ever since. He soon discovers that what he is hunting might not actually be human. So there's your brief synopsis there. This film was actually directed by Tony Malum. The writer was actually Gary Scott Thompson. Of course, this stars Rutger Hauer. You can tell that by the movie poster. That's the big selling point. Rutger Hauer from Blade Runner and Blind Fury and Hobo the Shotgun. Rutger Hauer's in this movie, everybody. Kim Cattrall is also in this film. Alistair, I think it's Duncan is his name, is in the film. It's an interesting cast. Because it's, Kim Cattrall and Rutger Hauer, I think, are probably the biggest names that most people will be familiar with. So when I saw this film back in the day, I quite enjoyed it. I have a fondness for these sort of this sort of low budget actioner kind of film. If you liked the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie, for example, I think this film kind of sits within that wheelhouse, because it's that sort of kind of low budget action kind of film. I think Punisher has obviously more bullets in it than this movie. But the thing I enjoyed about this film actually is its weird sense of humor it has about itself at time. And I don't know if that's just coming directly from Rutger or if that was just in the script. But someone's bringing, and I think it really is Rutger, is bringing sort of a sense of humor and making this sort of a weird buddy cop movie. And that's the thing that's kind of fun about the film as it moves on, is that eventually, Rutger Hauer's character and his partner, they have this sort of buddy cop sort of humor and banter about themselves, while at the same time taking on this sort of like B movie monster kind of idea. This film does have a cult status. It's quite popular, with those of us who love the film. I've always enjoyed this film. I've recommended it to all kinds of people. Some people like it, some people hate it. The reason I recommended this film was I kept telling Eric, I said, I think you'll like this film because it's a dude's movie. It's a dude movie. And by that, I mean, there's guns, there's action, it's very much a film for dudes. That was my big recommendation. You'll like it because it's a movie for dudes. So enough of my waxing poetic about how much I love the movie Split Second. Tell me, Eric, what did you think about the film Split Second?
Well, there's a couple of comments from the Rogues Gallery. Protronic Films does say this came out in the 90s, right? And that is correct. Came out in 1992, right, Dave? So it is an early 90s
1992.
Film. And he says, I remember vaguely this when I worked in the theater. So when he was actually working at a theater, Matt does remember this film. I have to say, I don't remember this film at all. And I mean at all. When Dave, when you asked me, about this or said, hey, I think this came up before where we were, for those who don't know, at the end of the show, off the air, Dave and I always discuss what we're going to do next week because we try to give ourselves that much time to view that stuff, so that we can do it at our leisure, as our own schedules allow. And I remember this coming up before, and of course back then I didn't have Amazon Prime, so because I didn't have Amazon Prime, it was like we can't do that. And then of course the other issue was typically with the retrospective, the Rogues retrospective format, we follow the old in the studio format, which is another show that Dave used to do, where it's basically a film that we both know about. So we both can kind of talk about what we thought about it back in the day when we were younger, and then we can talk about watching it now and how does the experience of when we were younger watching it compare with the experience today? How does it hold up? Well, in this particular case, as I mentioned, we're changing the format a little bit because I've never seen this film. And again, I never even heard of it. It wasn't on my radar at all. So I'm coming at this completely blind, other than what Dave mentioned, that he said, hey, this is a dude's movie, check it out. I really like it. Let's get into it. So the question becomes, what do I think of this film, Split Second? Well, I have to say I was taken aback. I think B movie is fairly accurate. It might be a little too kind, Dave. I would maybe go even like C movie, that kind of a thing. This movie is definitely not for everyone. I would have to say that. I do like the description of it being a dude's movie. It is not very politically correct. One thing that I do see in this movie is that I feel like this is definitely a celebration of those 80s action buddy cop movies. And would you agree with that, Dave, that that's kind of what this film is? It's an early 90s movie, but it really harkens back to that 80s style.
Yes, it's very much that kind of idea. Especially as the film moves on, it really reaches that point where it's almost kind of like, what if Mel Gibson and Danny Glover were trying to take on a supernatural monster serial killer, as opposed to taking on the more grounded real world threats that they deal with. But at the same point too, one of the things I like about this film is the idea that it does approach it with a sense of humor. So
Absolutely. Yeah. The humor is definitely there. And you know what I kept thinking about, Dave, when I was watching this was Hot Fuzz. Are you familiar with that movie?
yes, I love Hot Fuzz. That's a great movie.
Okay. So I love Hot Fuzz too. Now, one of the, to be fair, for folks that don't know, I spent 20 years in law enforcement, okay, in public safety. And so a lot of, a lot of cop movies, a lot of police movies and television shows are laughable to me, and they're not supposed to be, okay, because I don't think they're a realistic depiction of what law enforcement's like, what public safety is like, what it's like being a police officer. I just don't think they're realistic at all, and they just become silly to me, and that's unintentionally silly. I mean, they're meant to be serious depictions, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, that would never happen. Yeah, that's stupid. Now, what's interesting about this movie is because it is both kind of a horror and a science fiction film, and because you can kind of feel those homage aspects of it, like there's some real kind of, kind of crazy attempts at one-liners in this movie. I'm trying to think of some of the ones that came up, but you can see them, and that was a big thing in the '80s where they had like the one-liners and stuff. But the reason I think of Hot Fuzz is Hot Fuzz in a lot of ways, which by the way I highly recommend that film. I enjoy it quite a bit. Hot Fuzz is this sort of British idea, this sort of English idea of what would it be like to kind of live in an American 1980s buddy cop movie. You know what I mean? But it's set in England in a small town. And hilarity ensues because you can kind of think of that. Just put that all together. They're in a small town. Remember, most British police officers don't even carry guns. Most English police officers don't even carry guns. So it's very different. And then they kind of have to deal with that. And that's what Hot Fuzz does. Well, that's one of the more interesting aspects of this movie, because this movie takes place in a very dystopian future London. And because it's a dystopian future London, you don't have the traditional British Bobby thing where they don't have guns. Now they have guns, and they have big guns, and everybody has guns. You know what I mean? Because it's supposed to be this dystopian future. So it's kind of interesting to me because it feels like the writers, and producers of this film were like, in a lot of ways, they were like, like British guys who were kind of like, well, how do we make an American action film work in London? Because again, most of the police officers don't even carry guns. So it kind of throws that convention out the window almost immediately. And in this movie, they carry lots of guns. They carry lots of big guns. And that's something that's highly emphasized, the big guns. You know what I mean? That's a big part of the movie. That's one of the big parts of the movie, is where they start to arm up and realize that they need some bigger guns, And again, it's just kind of funny to me because this is an English movie and it was filmed in London. If you made a more realistic police movie that was trying to follow that 80s model, you immediately have that problem. Again, most of the police officers don't carry guns, although they do. They have armed response and things like that in London and other places in England. It's just not a big part of the culture, right? It's just not a big thing there. So it's kind of interesting to see what they were doing here, because I can see it. And I see that parallel between, Hot Fuzz, that was very deliberately comedic and very much is a comedy film. Whereas this one, it's kind of a little bit all over the place because it is action, it is horror, it is sci-fi. In fact, I think that's what it says on its description. But like you mentioned, it is also kind of a little bit comedic. And I wonder how much of that was meant to be that way and how much of it is a little bit unintentional because that 80s formula definitely had comedy. I mean, a lot of the classic Arnold Schwarzenegger one-liners and Sylvester Stallone one-liners are comedic. They're funny. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's a dark humor, but a lot of that stuff that they say, it is funny. I think of The Running Man. The Running Man is full of stuff like that, where he says, like he had to split, and the guy was like literally split apart or something like that. They have those kind of zingy, funny one-liners, and they do play with that in this film as well. I'll tell you, one thing that really did interest me was some of the cast, because although I don't know their names, I do recognize a lot of the faces of the British actors in this movie. And then I was just kind of shocked that Kim Cattrall's in this. You know what I mean? Like, I was just kind of like, Kim Cattrall's in this thing? You know what I mean? Because I think she was already a pretty big star even when this movie came out. and she's in it, and she has a very prominent role. So I was surprised by that, and I guess that to me is definitely kind of a highlight, because I think this is when she's in like her prime. So we do get we do get to see just about all of her. I'll mention that is the plus in this film.
That's what I was saying. It's a dude's movie,
it's a
man.
Dude's movie. That's
dude's
right.
Movie.
It's a dude's movie. We get to see Kim Cattrall's movie. So I'll just put it out there. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting movie. You know what I mean? That's the main thing I can say. It's an interesting movie. I do like some of the premise. This is right at the beginning, so it's not really a spoiler. The idea is basically global warming has caused a lot of the cities to start to become submerged, and London basically is almost becoming like Venice, right? Venice, Italy. They have crafts and there's water in the streets and things like that. That's an interesting premise. One thing that I thought was really weird is that Rutger Hauer plays very American in this. And I don't know if you have any insight in that, Dave, or what that was. I don't know if that's part of that homage or whatever, but it was a little weird to me, because Rutger Hauer he's like Danish or something, isn't he? I mean, he's European, and isn't he? I mean, he's not an American.
Well, part of the thing that's interesting about this film, because I did look into the research a little bit into it. I didn't get too far into it, but I did, just to satisfy my own curiosity before talking about it here on the show. This script was originally written to take place, I think, in like LA. Like it's meant to be set in America. And then they just basically took the story, they did some rewrites, and they basically set it in London. So I think the idea with Rutger Hauer, for example, is he's very much that 80s American cop, and they just leave it. Because that's the thing I like about this film, and that's also the thing I think would put a lot of people off. The idea that they just take some of these concepts and they just let it play out. They don't really worry. Like, for example, the main villain, the serial killer monster, we don't get a lot of backstory behind how it was created, how it came to be. We get theories and allusions to what they think it represents and how it came to be, but we don't really spend a lot of time with where the monster comes from. The monster just already exists. And
another interesting thing is we have this poster, which this is the official poster, right, Dave?
Yep. This is the one that actually I think this too was used on the VHS, but the original poster looked pretty much just like this.
It's funny because this is kind of a spoiler poster. You're actually seeing the creature more in this poster than you see him in the film. In the film, you barely ever see him. You mostly see his teeth, the venom-like teeth, and the claws. You really never get a good shot of him like this. It's kind of confusing to me, because I've never seen the poster either, and I'm just like, you don't see the villain as much as you see him in this poster in the movie.
Yeah, but see, again, one of the things I like about this film, in all honesty, it is the inconsistencies and the way it creates the humor. Like, one of the first scenes you see of Rutger, where he comes in with the gun and he's the hero, he starts tough talking a dog. Like right at the jump of the film, like right off the bat, you've got Rutger Hauer tough talking a dog. And there's this whole bit with the cigars and the chocolate and the insomnia, and the idea that all of these things they've pushed him to this edge. But at the same point, you're kind of, and it's a weird thing, but I kind of get the illusion that a percentage of the psychotic nature of the film is just because you're kind of seeing it sometimes from Rutger's perspective. And his character is unhinged and on the edge. So, but that's one of the things I like about the film.
Yeah, I mean, he clearly is unhinged. I am going to do a little spoiler, but it's in the beginning scene. It's something that kind of tainted me a little bit, and it might have tainted me a little bit in the rest of the movie as well. And so this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's early in the film. It's very early in the film. So the scene you're talking about, when he talks to the dog, he's going into a nightclub. And he's going in this nightclub because he kind of feels like the killer might be coming back. The killer's been gone for a while, and he feels the killer might be coming back and might appear in this nightclub. Well, there's this scene early in the film, and there's this woman who basically is going to the bathroom, and I guess it's like a unisex bathroom. So she politely asks him, "Can you watch the door and make sure nobody comes in on me?" Very simple request, and he agrees to it. Well, the next thing you know, he gets distracted, walks away, and the target of the killer happens to be that girl in the bathroom, and she's murdered. And so immediately I'm like, this guy's a terrible cop. You know what I mean? This guy is a really bad, like not, like not badass. I mean, this guy is a terrible cop. He couldn't just stand at the door after he agreed to do that. And that kind of immediately kind of put me in this weird thing. And my guess is the way you took that is it kind of just shows how crazy he is and kind of unpredictable he is. But that kind of took me out of it. And that's the only spoiler I'm going to give because it's so early in the movie and it really made me feel like this guy's incompetent.
Well, and again, I'll come back to this idea. He's not a great cop. I mean, and if you, again, from the beginning of the film, whether he's tough talking the dog or not, because it's pretty obvious, at least I remember when I originally saw this film, right from the jump, it's pretty obvious he's not a good cop at all. Okay. And you're following his story not because he's a great cop, not because he's a great detective. You're just following his story because of his link to the killer. And I don't want to get too far into that, but he has a very specific link to the killer, and they try to play this concept off later in the film. And it's one of those things, I like the film, and I've always enjoyed this film since I originally saw it. But again, like I said, this is sort of like a buddy cop film where they fight sort of like a B movie monster. I mean, it's not a high budget, great production or whatever. But I think when you get to that point, when you have sort of a lower budget, maybe you can explore the idea of this guy's just a horrible cop, and the only reason he ends up saving the day is because he can sense where the thing is. Because that's an important part of this movie is that because of his connection, he senses where the killer is. It's not like he's great at detecting. It's just he can sense it. It's like, oh, it's over here. Let's go over here, And the whole film is driven by that, just the connection that the killer and he share. And but at the same point too, again, it's sort of like it's a dude film. It's a film for dudes. It's got a lot of guns. It's got some women in it. It's just one of those sort of. It's not an exploitation film because it could have pushed some of these concepts even further than it did, obviously.
Oh yeah.
But it's that it sits and it lives in that era. It's that weird movie that's sitting on the VHS rack in the Blockbuster, and you're like going, huh. I like Rutger Hauer. What the hell is this thing? And then you just watch it and you're kind of surprised because you think it's going to be horrible, but you kind of have fun with it. I don't want to use the expletive deletive, but I love the scene where Rutger Hauer's partner realizes they need bigger guns. That's a lot of fun. I still laugh at that scene when he realizes, he's like, yeah, you're right. We need bigger guns, and then they're running around trying to find the biggest guns they possibly can, I
can't help but wonder if Simon Pegg is a fan of this movie, and that's part of Hot Fuzz, because Hot Fuzz has that same moment, where they start getting all the guns, Yeah, it's just, that's the thing I think is really, really fun. And that's the thing I love about this movie. It's just fun, and it's silly at times. Again, Rutger Hauer's not a great cop. That's one of the, and that, like I said, that's one of the things I like about the film. Well, that's Fortronix mentions because of his crazy.
Yeah, exactly,
he's nuts.
Exactly.
And I can see that. It's one of those things that kind of just takes me out of it a little bit. And some of that stuff comes from my background. There's just no denying it. When I see films like this, even one thing that's good about this for me is because it is dystopian future, and because it is, horror and sci-fi, I can have a little bit more suspension of disbelief. That does help. But that particular scene kind of, because it's so early, you know what I mean? It was just kind of weird to me. But I understand what you're saying, Dave. I think you have a totally valid perspective there, and it does make sense. And there are some funny scenes in this, like you said, the big gun thing, the thing about the partner, and how often he has sex. I mean, that's kind of funny. You know what I mean? There are definitely moments where I was chuckling and things like that. And I think that was meant to be humorous. You know what I mean? So, I don't think this movie's for everyone. I'll tell you that, Dave. I don't think this movie's for everyone by any stretch of the imagination. But there are some interesting moments in this, and I do think that the creature itself was pretty interesting. You know what I mean? I definitely felt that Venom vibe that you're talking about. That's exactly what I thought when I saw that, especially the teeth. I was thinking Venom 100%. So, and by the way, did this came out after Venom, right? Venom came out first, or which one came out first?
Well, I think Venom was probably a little bit before this, so this might have taken some inspiration from that. But at the same point, too, it's important to remember that if you look at the design of the creature, I think the design of the creature basically there's a very specific image that H.R. Giger created back in the 70s. And I really think this is more heavily inspired by H.R. Giger's illustration than necessarily Venom. The allusions to Venom is, I think, just the teeth and the all black nature of the character in terms of the coloring of the monster. I think it you know what I mean? It connects it a little bit closer. But it's interesting too about this film, and I'm trying to verify it, and I haven't quite been able to verify it yet. But if I remember correctly, well, here we go. It's right here. So I thought this was the case, and I was correct. So Stephen Norrington, who actually was the director who did Blade, he actually got his start actually doing creature effects, and one of his earliest films actually was Split Second. So Stephen Norrington actually worked in helping to create this creature. So there may have been a comic connection, just knowing that Stephen Norrington's involved too. But I quite like a lot of Stephen Norrington's stuff. I think he gets a bit of a raw deal because of some of his later films. But I really, like I said, I like the design of the monster, and it's just kind of a fun movie. This is one of those films, I think, that there's enough here, and it has a little bit of a cult following. If you had a modest budget, I think you could do a fun Split Second, sequel, and kind of revisit these concepts and have fun with it, in a more contemporary manner, and lean into the buddy cop action 80s idea even further.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking that on a previous episode we reviewed Crawl, and I talked about how, like, if I was like super rich and as my vanity sort of insanity project, like that one kind of like Howard Hughes kind of moment that you have once you're really well established, you've got tons of money and you start doing crazy stuff, I would make Crawl 2. And I thought, you know what? Split Second 2 is Dave's Crawl 2. You know what I mean? Like, I could totally see that you doing a sequel for this movie if you had like the resources and the budget and the rights and all that stuff, that this would be your sort of crazy project.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'd have a lot of fun with this thing. And because that's the thing. One of the cool things about this movie is the fact that we don't really know where the creature really comes from. I mean, we get some theories and some allusions to some things, but there's all the origin of the creature. Is it one of a kind? Is it part of a species? Is it like the Predator? Is it part of a race and they come to an area where they can hunt? There's a lot of interesting ideas that could be explored within this concept. And I think the thing that's neat is that you've got a very interesting film to potentially buoy or hold up, that sequel, so that people go back and experience the original film. They go, wow, this is some crazy stuff. Now I can see where that other thing came from. So
yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense.
Yeah. So the overall verdict is, I'm just going to tell you right now, You can stream Split Second. It's on Tubi. It's on Hulu. You can watch on Amazon Prime. It's available in a lot of different outlets. You can obviously rent it, just to watch on Amazon too. This is a fun movie. I recommend it just because it's fun. And I've always had a lot of laughs with it and just enjoyed it for what it is. I'm a huge Rutger Hauer fan. Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I've seen so many movies just because Rutger Hauer was in it, including this movie. But the thing that's interesting about this film is I always find myself revisiting it, coming back to it, and enjoying it. And most of the people I've showed it to, they end up becoming a fan. My brother and I, we've had so many fun conversations about Split Second because I introduced this film to him too, and he loves the film as well. I don't mean to speak for him, but we've had many conversations about this film, and I've always enjoyed it. So I'm going to say this is definitely worth checking out. Eric, what's your final verdict? Would you say that this is worth checking out, or is this just a pass?
Well, I would say that it's definitely not for everyone. There's a lot of violence in this. There's a lot of gore. There is nudity as well. If you're into those things, you'll probably enjoy this. There are some issues with some of the. It's not exactly the pacing; it's the timing. There's some timing issues in this film. Sometimes the lines to me are delivered in a way that I'm just kind of like, I feel like they fall a little bit flat, like they're meant to invoke something that they just didn't invoke for me. So that's really what I'm going to say. I don't think this film is for everybody. Did I like it? There were things that I liked about it. There are definitely things that I liked about it, but there were things that I really, really put me off as well. So the bottom line is, I think if you're into those kinds of things, if you like those kinds of movies, we talked about like the buddy cop formula, things like that, then I think it's for you. If it's not, if you don't like those kinds of things, yeah, I would say hard pass.
All right, well, there you go.
And we've got quite a thread, but I want to leave that for the last word because I think that would be good to just leave this thread that we have there as the last word because he has quite a bit to say, actually.
All right. Okay. That sounds good. Then are we good to maybe just go ahead and segue over to the outro?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. So I want to thank you for hopefully watching or listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Again, my name is Dave Beatty. I've been one of your hosts. If you're curious to learn more about me, see some of my artwork, as well as learn more about some of the projects I've been involved with, you can do all that and so much more at my website. That's at davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeatty.com, which also serves as the official home actually for the Retro Rogues as well. So definitely, if you get a chance, go there, check it out. And you can even send me a message there if you are so inclined. So I want to thank you again for watching this episode. And I want to also thank my great co-host, Mr. Eric Alexander, for being here on the show. Even if he didn't like my particular pick of a movie, that's okay. We're still friends. So, Eric, please tell the folks who'll be watching or listening where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
I wouldn't go so far as say I didn't like it. I'm just kind of about it. I guess that I don't know how else to describe it. But you can find me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active is on Twitter, at BassGod14, at BASSGOD14. You can see it printed right next to my icon there. I'm always open to suggestions. This film was a suggestion by Dave. We plan to do this again in the future, whether he's suggesting a film to me, a retro film to me, or me suggesting one to him. Even if we haven't both seen it, we're going to play with this format. And we open it up to the Rogues Gallery as well. The new film we reviewed today, The Vast of Night, that was a recommendation from the Rogues Gallery. We're always open to that kind of stuff. So please let us know because we want to experiment with this format now. Experiment with this format more. And who knows, maybe we'll get a retro or older film from the Rogues Gallery one of these days that neither Dave or I have seen. In fact, the one retro review that we have done in the past that was recommended by the Rogues Gallery was The Fisher King. Dave and I just happened to both have seen it, but that may not be the case in the future. So we definitely want to play with this format a little bit more, amongst the two of us, and then also with the Rogues Gallery. And speaking of the Rogues Gallery, Portronics Films had quite a few comments during our little back and forth, and I'm going to share them now. So he says, Portronic Film says, I have to side with Dave on this one. On this one, sorry, Base. He said, quote, because it's a dude's film. He says, that's perfect, Dave. I enjoyed it. Just for dudes. It's a dude's film. I'm down to see it, Dave. I'm with you, Dave. And thanks for a great show. And with that, we will leave our viewers with the last word.